The ER doors exploded inward with a crash that made every head turn. Blood streaked across white tile as two soldiers half-carried a third between them, his leg wrapped in field dressing gone crimson. The triage nurse barely glanced up from her paperwork. Saturday night in downtown Baltimore, another gunshot, another overdose, another problem that wasn't hers until someone made it hers. But the wounded man's eyes locked onto someone across the room, a woman in blue scrubs refilling a medication cart, and his face went ghost white. He grabbed his buddy's collar with shaking hands. "That's her," he choked out. "That's fucking Hassan." The woman's head snapped up. For one frozen heartbeat, their eyes met, and she looked like she'd seen a corpse walk through the door. Because officially, Dr. Amira Hassan died 3 years ago in a mortar strike outside Kandahar. The military held a memorial. Her name went on a wall. And the man bleeding out in front of her had been part of the unit that spent 6 months searching for her body in a war zone that didn't give up its dead. If you want to see how far a ghost can run before the past catches up, stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment with your city. I want to know how far this story travels. The soldier's name was Marcus Webb, staff sergeant, 29 years old, and bleeding through a thigh wound that should have sent him straight to surgery. Instead, he was staring at a woman who wasn't supposed to exist, and she was staring back like he'd just ripped her entire life open with 6 words. "Get him to trauma 2, someone barked, but Marcus didn't move. His boots stayed planted on blood-slick linoleum while the ER noise, screaming babies, beeping monitors, a drunk guy shouting about his rights, faded into white static. The woman in scrubs took one step backward, then another, her hand still gripping a medication tray that rattled against her chest. "Marcus, man, you're gonna bleed out!" His buddy, a wiry kid named Vance, tried to pull him toward the hallway, but Marcus jerked free. "That's Dr. Hassan," he said again, louder this time. Heads turned. A security guard near the vending machines looked up from his phone. The woman's voice came out quiet, careful, like she was talking down a rabid dog. "I think you're confused. My name is Nadia Karimi. I'm a nurse here." "Bullshit." Marcus took a limping step forward, and 2 orderlies moved to block him. Pain shot up his leg, hot and vicious, but he didn't care. "You were attached to the 3rd Medical out of Bagram. You ran a field clinic in Kandahar province. You disappeared in November 2021 after a convoy ambush, and we spent half a fucking year looking for your body." Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes cracked. She set the tray down on a nearby cart, hands trembling so hard the pill bottles clinked together. "You have me confused with someone else." "Do I?" Marcus's voice dropped, and suddenly the chaos around them felt miles away. Because the woman I'm thinking of had a scar on her left forearm from a shrapnel wound, curved, about 3 inches long. His eyes flicked to her arm. The scrub sleeve covered it, but she instinctively pulled her wrist closer to her body. Her mouth opened, closed. "I need to... There's a patient..." "Show me your arm." "Sir, you need medical attention." One of the orderlies, a big guy with a shaved head, put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We're going to get you taken care of, but you got to calm down." Marcus ignored him. "If I'm wrong, prove it. Roll up your sleeve." For a moment, the entire ER held its breath. Then the woman, Nadia, Amira, whoever the hell she really was, turned on her heel and walked straight toward the staff exit, moving fast but not running, like she'd done this before. Like she had an escape route planned for the day someone finally recognized her. Marcus shoved past the orderly and followed. "Hey!" The security guard finally woke up, jogging after them. "Sir, you can't go back there." But Marcus was already through the door, bleeding leg and all, stumbling into a narrow hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. The woman was 20 feet ahead, moving toward a stairwell, and he shouted after her, "You owe us an explanation!" She spun around, and this time her face wasn't careful. It was raw. "I don't owe you anything. My lieutenant died looking for you." The words came out jagged, ripped from somewhere deep. "Rollins. You remember him? Big guy, always had a pack of gum in his pocket. Took an IED 2 months into the search because command kept pushing us into hostile territory, kept saying we had to recover you, had to bring you home. He bled out before the medevac arrived, and I held pressure on his femoral artery until my hands went numb, and the whole time I kept thinking at least we're going to find her, at least his death means something." His voice cracked. "And now you're here." alive, working the night shift in Baltimore like none of it ever happened. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it went harder. You should have left me for dead. Yeah, well, we didn't. Marcus leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how much blood he'd lost. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered. So what the hell happened? You get captured? Turn informant? What was so bad you had to fake your own death and disappear? This conversation is over. She turned back toward the stairwell. I'll tell them. The words stopped her cold. I'll go back out there right now and tell everyone who you really are. I'll call my CO. I'll call the fucking Pentagon if I have to. She turned slowly, and the look on her face could have stripped paint off walls. You do that, and you'll destroy more than just me. Try me. For a long moment they stood there in that ugly hallway, two people who'd survived the same war in completely different ways, neither one willing to blink first. Then she walked back toward him, close enough that he could see the exhaustion carved into her features, the kind that didn't come from a long shift. You want the truth? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit like a rifle shot. Fine, but not here. She glanced over her shoulder at the security guard, who was talking into his radio, probably calling for backup. And if you're smart, you'll get that leg looked at before you bleed out on my floor. Because if you die here, none of this matters anyway. Marcus's vision swam, dark spots creeping in at the edges. He hated that she was right. Trauma too, she said, her tone shifting back into something clinical and detached. Let them stitch you up. I'll find you after my shift. 3 a.m. There's a diner 2 blocks east on Lombard. Be there. She paused. And Marcus? Don't bring anyone else. You want answers, you come alone. Then she was gone, disappearing up the stairwell before he could argue. The security guard caught up a second later, out of breath and annoyed. Sir, you gotta come with me. Yeah. Marcus let Vance and the orderlies grab him this time, half carrying him back toward the ER. His leg felt like it was on fire, and his head was full of static, but one thought cut through clear as day. She remembered my name. He hadn't introduced himself, hadn't given her anything except accusations and old memories. But she'd called him Marcus like she'd known exactly who he was the second he walked through those doors, which meant she'd been ready for this, waiting for it maybe. The question was, how long? Trauma 2 smelled like iodine and old blood. A tired-looking doctor with gray stubble stitched Marcus's leg while a nurse he didn't recognize monitored his vitals. And the whole time he kept replaying that hallway conversation, looking for cracks, for lies, for anything that didn't add up. But the problem was, it all added up too well. The fear in her eyes. The way she'd flinched when he mentioned Rollins. The scar she wouldn't show him but couldn't quite hide. You're lucky, the doctor said, tying off the last suture. Another inch to the left and you'd have hit the femoral. Who patched you up before you got here? Army medic. Marcus didn't elaborate. The wound had come from a bar fight in Fells Point. Some drunk asshole with a broken bottle and a bad attitude. But he wasn't about to explain that. Not when his brain was still stuck 3 years in the past, in the dust and heat of Kandahar province, watching his unit turn over every burnt-out compound and empty grave, looking for a doctor who might already be dead. Well, your medic did good work, the doctor said, stripping off his gloves. Stay off it for a week. No running, no heavy lifting. And if you see any signs of infection, redness, swelling, fever, come back immediately. Marcus nodded, barely listening. Vance was slumped in a chair by the door, half asleep, his phone screen casting a blue glow across his face. The ER had quieted down, the early night chaos giving way to the hollow 2 a.m. lull when even the gunshot wound slowed down. Can I go? Marcus asked. The doctor gave him a look. You should stay for observation. Possible hypovolemic shock, and you've got a history of... I'm fine, sir. I'm leaving. Marcus slid off the exam table, testing his weight on the bad leg. It hurt like hell, but it held. Good enough. Vance jerked awake when Marcus shook his shoulder. We done? Yeah, get out of here. I'll catch an Uber. Vance blinked at him, confused. You sure? I can wait. Go home, man. I'm good. Vance didn't argue. He was too tired, and Marcus was too stubborn. 5 minutes later, Marcus was alone in the ER waiting room, watching the clock tick toward 3 a.m. and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At 2:47, he limped out into the October cold, leg throbbing with every step, and headed east on Lombard. The diner was called Lucky's, which was either ironic or prophetic depending on how the next hour went. It was the kind of place that served breakfast 24 hours a day and didn't ask questions as long as you kept ordering coffee. Marcus slid into a booth near the back, ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Carter administration, and waited. She showed up at 3:02, no scrubs this time. Jeans, a dark hoodie, hair tied back in a way that made her look younger than he remembered. She slid into the booth across from him without a word, and for a moment they just sat there. Two strangers who used to know each other in a place that didn't exist anymore. "You came," she said finally. "You told me to. I also told you to come alone." Her eyes flicked toward the door, scanning for threats on instinct. Old habits. "I did." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't leave either. The waitress came by and she ordered tea, hands folded on the table like she was waiting for a job interview. When they were alone again, she spoke first. "His name was Rollins," she said quietly. "He chewed spearmint gum because he hated the taste of field rations. He had a daughter back in Tennessee, 4 years old. He showed me a picture once." She met Marcus's eyes. "I'm sorry he's dead. I'm sorry you had to watch it happen, but it wasn't my fault." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then whose fault was it?" "The same people who sent us all there in the first place." Her voice didn't rise, but the bitterness in it was sharp enough to cut. "You think I wanted to disappear? You think I woke up one day and decided to abandon my unit, my career, everything I'd worked for? So what happened?" The tea arrived. She wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. "We were running a medical outpost outside Kandahar. Small operation. Me, 2 nurses, a couple of local interpreters. We treated everyone. Coalition forces, Afghan police, civilians. It didn't matter. If you were bleeding, we helped." She paused, staring into the tea like it held answers she hadn't found yet. Then one night, a group of fighters showed up. Not Taliban, worse. They had a wounded kid with them, maybe 13, 14 years old, shrapnel in his chest, punctured lung. They put a gun to my head and told me to save him. Marcus felt something cold settle in his gut. "I did," she continued. "I saved him. And then they told me I worked for them now. If I refused, they'd kill the interpreters. If I ran, they'd burn down the village we'd been helping. If I called for backup, everyone died." Her hands tightened around the cup. "So I stayed. I treated their wounded. I kept my head down and did what I was told, and I hated every second of it, but at least people were alive." "How long?" 3 months. She finally took a sip of tea and her hands were shaking. 3 months of patching up fighters who'd just killed coalition soldiers. 3 months of lying to my own people every time they radioed for a status update. 3 months of waiting for the day they decided I wasn't useful anymore and put a bullet in my head. She set the cup down. Then a drone strike hit the compound. I don't know if it was targeting us or if we were just collateral, but the place went up like a firework. I got out through a collapsed wall, stole a truck, and drove until I ran out of gas. By the time I made it to friendly territory, I was already dead. Officially. They'd found enough bodies in the rubble to close the case, and I realized if I came back, if I told them what happened, I'd spend the rest of my life in front of courts-martial and congressional hearings. They'd call me a traitor, a collaborator. They'd say I gave aid to the enemy. Her voice went flat. So I stayed dead. Marcus sat back, feeling like he'd been gut-punched. You should have trusted us. We would have what? She cut him off, and this time there was fire in her voice. Believed me? Defended me? Marcus, I was treating enemy combatants. I was keeping insurgents alive so they could go back out and kill more of our guys. You think the army would have cared that I was being coerced? You think they would have just let it slide? He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the system would have protected her, that justice would have won out. But he'd been in long enough to know better. I did what I had to do, she said, quieter now. I saved lives. That's all I ever wanted to do. And if that makes me a traitor, then fine. I'll live with it. But I won't apologize. The diner was almost empty now, just them and a guy at the counter nursing a plate of eggs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. Marcus felt the weight of 3 years pressing down on him. All those missions, all that grief, all that time spent chasing a ghost who'd never wanted to be found. "Why nursing?" he asked finally. "You were a doctor. You could have gone anywhere, done anything." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Doctors get noticed, nurses don't, and I needed to disappear." She leaned back, arms crossed. "So now you know. What are you going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? He could walk out of here, make a call, and blow her entire life apart. He could expose her, drag her back into the system that had already chewed her up once. He could get justice for Rollins, for everyone who died looking for her. Or he could let it go. "I don't know," he said honestly. She nodded, like she'd expected that. "Well, you've got my secret now. Do whatever you need to do." She stood, pulling the hoodie tighter around herself. "But for what it's worth, I'm glad you made it home. I'm glad you're still here." She turned to leave, and Marcus found himself saying, "Wait." She stopped. "The scar," he said, "on your arm. When did you get it?" She pulled up her sleeve without hesitation this time, showing him the curved white line that ran from wrist to elbow. "Shrapnel. Same strike that killed me the first time." She let the sleeve drop. "Guess I'm harder to kill than they thought." Then she walked out, leaving Marcus alone with cold coffee and a choice he didn't want to make. He sat there for another 20 minutes, staring at nothing, replaying the conversation over and over until the words lost meaning. The waitress refilled his coffee twice without asking, probably used to people having existential crises in her booth at 3 a.m. His phone buzzed. A text from Vance. "You good?" Marcus typed back, "Yeah." Another buzz. This time from his CO. "Heard you got into it tonight. We need to talk." He ignored that one. The problem was she was right. If he brought this up the chain, the army would eat her alive. Courts-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison time depending on how hard they wanted to push the collaboration angle. It didn't matter that she'd been coerced. It didn't matter that she'd saved lives. The optics were bad, and the military ran on optics. But if he stayed quiet, if he let her keep living this half-life under a fake name, then what did that make him? What did it say about Rollins, about everyone who died thinking they were bringing her home? His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a news alert. Breaking. Coordinated attacks on military medical facilities in 3 states. Casualties reported. Marcus's blood went cold. He opened the article, skimming through the details. Simultaneous bombings at VA hospitals in Texas, North Carolina, and Georgia. Early reports suggested domestic terrorism, anti-government militias, the kind of people who thought the system needed burning down. Casualty numbers were still coming in, but it was bad. Real bad. And then, buried in the third paragraph, a detail that made his stomach drop. Authorities are searching for potential inside contacts, including former military medical personnel with known grievances against the Department of Defense. Someone was hunting for ghosts. He was out of the booth and through the door before he'd finished reading, legs screaming in protest as he broke into a limping run back toward the hospital. He didn't know if they'd connect the dots to her yet, didn't know if her fake name would hold up under federal scrutiny, but he knew one thing for sure. Amir Hassan's past was about to catch up with her, whether she was ready or not. And this time, there wouldn't be any rubble to hide in. The ER was crawling with federal agents by the time Marcus got back. Black SUVs lined the ambulance bay, their lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness in rhythmic blue strobes. He pushed through the main entrance, leg on fire, and nearly collided with a woman in a dark suit who stepped directly into his path. "Hospitals closed to non-emergency traffic," she said, flashing a badge too fast for him to read the name. FBI, probably. Maybe DHS. "You need to turn around." "I'm a patient here. Got stitches an hour ago." Marcus gestured to his leg, where blood was starting to seep through the bandage again. Running 3 blocks on a fresh wound had been spectacularly stupid, but here they were. The agent's eyes narrowed, scanning him head to toe like he was a threat assessment waiting to happen. "Name: Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. I can show you my military ID if—" "Wait here." She stepped aside, murmuring into a radio clipped to her collar, and Marcus used the moment to look past her into the ER. More suits. More badges. Hospital staff clustered in nervous groups near the nurses' station, and he spotted the security guard from earlier talking to two agents, gesturing animatedly toward the hallway where he'd chased Amira. His chest tightened. They were already asking questions, already piecing it together. The agent came back, her expression slightly less hostile. "You're clear to get your wound checked, but stay in the treatment area. Don't wander." Marcus nodded and moved past her, keeping his head down, scanning faces. No sign of Amira. Maybe she'd already left. Maybe she'd seen the SUVs rolling up and bolted out a side exit, put 100 miles between herself and Baltimore before the sun came up. Smart move, if she had. But something told him she hadn't run. He found an empty corner near Trauma 3 and pulled out his phone, pulling up the news again. The casualty count had climbed. 14 dead, 32 injured across 3 separate bombings. The attacks had been coordinated down to the minute, each device detonating at shift change when the halls were most crowded. Whoever planned it knew how military hospitals operated, knew the routines, the vulnerabilities, the exact moments when maximum damage could be done. And the feds were looking for someone with inside knowledge. Marcus Webb? He looked up. A man in his 50s, gray suit, tired eyes, holding a coffee that looked like it had gone cold an hour ago. No badge visible, but the way he carried himself screamed federal agent. "Yeah. Special Agent Harding, FBI. He didn't offer a hand. "I understand you were treated here earlier tonight." "That's right." "And you had an interaction with one of the staff members, a nurse." Harding pulled out a small notepad, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. "Witnesses say you confronted her, called her by a different name, got pretty agitated about it." Marcus kept his face neutral. "I was bleeding and full of adrenaline. Thought I recognized someone from my unit. I was wrong." "Were you?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah. She set me straight. Case of mistaken identity." Harding studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the weight of that stare, the decades of interrogation experience looking for cracks in his story. "This person you thought you recognized, what was her name?" "Doesn't matter. Like I said, I was wrong." "Humor me." Marcus met his eyes. "Am I under investigation for something?" "Should you be?" "I got in a bar fight and came here to get stitched up. That's the whole story." Harding took a sip of his cold coffee, grimaced, and set it down on a nearby equipment cart. "Here's the thing, Sergeant Webb. 3 VA hospitals just got hit by people who knew exactly what they were doing. People with military training, medical knowledge, and a serious grudge against the system. Now I've got a staff sergeant showing up in an ER in the middle of the night, making a scene about a nurse who allegedly doesn't exist, and that nurse..." He checked his notepad. "Nadia Karimi happens to have gone off shift early and can't be reached, so you'll forgive me if I'm not buying the mistaken identity story." "Where is she?" Marcus kept his voice level, but his pulse kicked up a notch. "That's what I'd like to know." Harding closed the notepad. "You have any idea where Miss Karimi might be right now?" "No." "You sure about that?" "Yeah." Harding studied him again, then pulled out a business card and held it out. "If that changes, if you remember anything, see anything, hear anything, you call me, day or night. Understood?" Marcus took the card. "Understood." Harding walked away, leaving Marcus alone with a growing sense of dread and a phone that buzzed with another incoming text. This one from a number he didn't recognize. "Parking garage. Level 3. Come alone." He deleted the message and headed for the stairs. The parking garage was a concrete tomb, fluorescent lights flickering in that irregular rhythm that made everything feel vaguely apocalyptic. Marcus's footsteps echoed as he climbed to level 3, leg protesting every step, hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he wasn't carrying. Stupid. He was unarmed, wounded, and walking into a potential ambush because a woman he barely knew anymore had sent him a cryptic text. But he kept walking. She was waiting near a maintenance door, half hidden in shadow, still wearing the hoodie, but with a backpack slung over one shoulder. When she saw him, her whole body seemed to sag with relief. "You came." "You said to." Marcus stopped a few feet away, keeping space between them. "The feds are looking for you." "I know. I saw them arrive." She glanced toward the exit ramp, eyes constantly moving. "They think I'm involved in the bombings." "Are you?" Her head snapped back toward him, and the hurt on her face was genuine. You really have to ask that? I don't know what to think anymore. Marcus leaned against a concrete pillar, taking weight off his bad leg. You've been living under a fake name for 3 years. You disappeared from a war zone. Now people are blowing up military hospitals, and the feds think you fit the profile. I'm a nurse, Marcus. I save lives. I don't take them. Yeah, well, you also lied about who you are. So forgive me if I'm having trouble keeping track. She flinched, but didn't back down. I lied to survive. There's a difference. Is there? For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the street below and the irregular buzz of dying lights. Then she shifted the backpack, unzipping it enough to show him what was inside. A laptop, a handful of USB drives, and a stack of documents held together with rubber bands. I've been tracking them, she said quietly. The people who held me in Kandahar. The network they were part of. After I got out, after I built a new life, I thought I could just forget, move on. But I kept seeing their faces, kept thinking about all the soldiers they killed, all the attacks they planned. So I started digging, used my medical access to cross-reference patient records, injury patterns, anything that might connect back to them. She pulled out one of the USB drives, holding it up. I've been documenting everything for 2 years. Names, locations, financial transactions. I was going to turn it all over to the authorities once I had enough to make a case. But then this happened. She gestured vaguely toward the hospital. And now if I come forward, they'll arrest me before they even look at the evidence. Marcus stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. You're telling me you've been running an intelligence operation as a civilian, unauthorized, probably illegal. I'm telling you I found the people responsible for killing our guys, and I've been trying to stop them. Her voice hardened. You want to turn me in? Fine, but at least look at what I've got first. Because if I'm right, the attacks tonight are just the beginning. He should have walked away. Should have called Harding, handed over the evidence, and let the system handle it. That was the right move, the smart move. Instead, he took the USB drive. Show me, he said. They ended up in Marcus's apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in Canton that smelled like old coffee and testosterone. Amira set up her laptop on his kitchen table while he made a fresh pot, both of them running on fumes and adrenaline. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten, gray dawn creeping over the harbor. Start from the beginning, Marcus said, setting a mug in front of her. She didn't touch it, just pulled up a series of files, charts, and spreadsheets, and scanned documents that looked like they'd been cobbled together from a dozen different sources. The group that held me, they called themselves Haq Collective. Not Taliban, not ISIS, something different. They operated in the border regions, mostly funded through black market medical supplies and weapons smuggling. But their real specialty was intelligence. They had people embedded everywhere. Afghan police, local militias, even coalition support staff. She clicked through to a network diagram, lines connecting names and photos in a web that sprawled across the screen. After the withdrawal, most of them scattered, went underground, but they didn't stop. They just shifted focus. She pointed to a cluster of names in the corner. This group here, 4 former Afghan nationals who got visas to the U.S. as translators. Clean backgrounds, vetted by State Department, no red flags. They settled in different cities, kept their heads down, got jobs. Let me guess, Marcus said. Texas, North Carolina, Georgia. She nodded. All 3 worked in or around VA hospitals. Janitorial staff, food service, security. Low-level positions that gave them building access and let them map out routines without raising suspicion. She pulled up photos. Men in their 30s and 40s, ordinary faces that could have belonged to anyone. I flagged them 6 months ago. Tried to report it through an anonymous tip line, but nothing happened, so I kept watching. And 2 weeks ago, I noticed something. She brought up a spreadsheet tracking supply orders. All 3 facilities started ordering unusual amounts of medical-grade chemicals. Stuff that could be repurposed into explosives if you knew what you were doing. Marcus leaned closer, scanning the data. You're sure it's them? I'm sure someone's using their access to stage materials inside those hospitals. Whether it's these 4 or someone else in the network, I don't know. But the pattern's there. She looked up at him, and her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. I was going to send all of this to the FBI this week. I had it ready to go. And then you walked into my ER and recognized me, and I panicked. Because I knew if they started digging into my background, they'd find holes. They'd realize Nadia Karimi didn't exist before 2022. And once they knew I was lying about my identity, they'd never believe anything else I told them. Marcus sat back, scrubbing a hand over his face. His leg throbbed, his head hurt, and he was suddenly responsible for information that could either stop a terrorist network or destroy what was left of Amir's life, depending on how he played it. "We need to take this to someone," he said finally. "Who?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The feds think I'm a suspect. My credentials are fake. I've got no official standing, no clearance, nothing that gives me credibility. The second I walk into a federal building, I'm getting arrested. Then we find someone who'll listen." "Like who?" Marcus thought about it. His CO was a by-the-book lifer who'd report this up the chain before Marcus finished his first sentence. His old unit was scattered across 3 continents. He didn't have connections at FBI or DHS, didn't know anyone with enough pull to make this stick, but he knew someone who might. "There's a guy," he said slowly. "Runs a private security firm out of DC, former Delta, got out a few years ago and started contracting for DOD. He's got connections everywhere, Pentagon, state, intelligence community. If anyone can get this in front of the right people without you getting burned, it's him. You trust him?" "With my life." Marcus pulled out his phone. "His name's Kendrick Lawson. We served together in Iraq. He owes me one." Amira looked skeptical, but she didn't argue. "Make the call." Lawson answered on the 3rd ring, voice rough with sleep. "This better be good, Webb. I need a favor." "Jesus Christ, it's 5 in the morning." "I know, and I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Talk." Marcus gave him the short version, the bombings, the evidence, the woman sitting across from him who technically didn't exist. To Lawson's credit, he didn't interrupt, didn't ask stupid questions, just listened with the kind of focus that came from years of operating in places where bad intel got you killed. When Marcus finished, Lawson was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're sure about this data?" "As sure as I can be without running it through official channels." "And the woman, you trust her?" Marcus looked at Amira, at the exhaustion and desperation and stubborn determination written across her face. "Yeah, I do." Another pause. "All right, I've got a contact at DOD Counterintelligence. Solid guy, doesn't play politics. I can get him to look at the evidence off book, but he's going to want to talk to your source, face to face." "That's not going to work." "She's got heat on her." "Then she needs to get out of Baltimore. Like now." Lawson's voice sharpened. "If the feds are looking at her, they've probably got surveillance on her apartment, her car, maybe even her phone. You two need to move, and you need to do it clean." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "You think they're tracking us right now?" "I think if they're smart, they've been tracking you since you left that hospital." Lawson exhaled. "Look, get to Union Station. Take public transit, pay cash, ditch your phones. There's a locker on the lower level, number 247. Combination is 8419. Inside you'll find a burner phone and some cash. Use it to call me once you're clear, and I'll set up the meet." "But Marcus," his tone went serious, "if this goes sideways, I can't protect you. You're stepping way outside the lines here." "I know." "Good. Now get moving." The line went dead. Amira was already on her feet, shoving the laptop back into her pack. "How far is Union Station?" 20-minute drive, maybe an hour on foot." Marcus grabbed his jacket, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "We're not taking my car. If Lawson's right, they could have a tracker on it." "So we walk?" "We take the bus. Less conspicuous." He pulled out his wallet, checking his cash. $60. Enough for 2 tickets and maybe breakfast if they didn't eat much. "Leave your phone here. They can track those." She hesitated, then pulled a cheap Android from her pocket and set it on the table. Marcus did the same with his iPhone, feeling weirdly naked without it. Modern life had made everyone a walking surveillance package, and going dark meant cutting yourself off from everything that mattered. They slipped out the back entrance of his building, into an alley that stank of garbage and last night's rain. The streets were empty, just a few early morning runners and a sanitation truck grinding its way down the block. Marcus kept them moving at a steady pace. Not too fast, not too slow, just two people heading to work or catching an early train. But his nerves were screaming. Every car that passed felt like a threat. Every pedestrian could be an agent. When they reached the bus stop on Eastern Avenue, he positioned himself so he could watch the street in both directions, looking for the telltale signs of surveillance, cars that moved too slow, people who looked without seeing, anything that didn't fit the rhythm of a normal morning. The bus came. They got on, paid cash, sat in the back, and for 15 minutes, Marcus let himself believe they'd actually pulled it off. Then he saw the sedan. It was 2 cars back, black, nondescript, with tinted windows and government plates. Could have been a coincidence, could have been nothing, but it had been behind them since they left Canton. "We've got a tail," he said quietly, leaning close to Amira. She didn't turn around, didn't give anything away. "You sure?" "No, but we need to assume yes." The bus rumbled toward the harbor, stopping every few blocks to pick up passengers. Marcus watched the sedan through the rear window, counting the seconds between stops, mapping out their options. If they got off now, the tail would follow. If they stayed on, the tail would follow them all the way to Union Station, and then the meet with Lawson's contact would be blown before it started. They needed to lose the car. Fast. "Next stop," he said. "We get off, head into the metro station and split up. You take the red line north, I'll take it south. Meet at the locker in 30 minutes. "That's a terrible plan." "You got a better one?" She didn't. The bus hissed to a stop at Lexington Market, and they moved. Marcus let Amira go first, keeping himself between her and the street, and they descended into the metro station like they'd done it 1,000 times. The morning rush was just starting, enough bodies to provide cover, but not so many that they'd get trapped in a crowd. Marcus risked a glance back. The sedan had pulled over, hazards on. A man in a suit climbed out, talking into a phone. "Move," Marcus said, and they ran. Down the escalator, through the turnstiles, onto the platform just as a northbound train screeched to a halt. Doors opened. Amira hesitated. "Go," Marcus told her. 30 minutes. Don't be late." She went, disappearing into the train just as the doors closed. Marcus waited until it pulled out, then crossed to the southbound platform, watching for the suit. 30 seconds. A minute. No sign of him. The southbound train arrived. Marcus got on, found a seat, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That's when he saw the woman. She was standing near the doors, mid-40s, business casual, reading something on her phone. Perfectly normal, except Marcus had seen her before, at the hospital, talking to one of the agents near the nurses' station. His blood went cold. They hadn't been tailing the bus. They'd been waiting for him to run, and now they had him boxed in, separated from Amira, heading in the opposite direction with no way to warn her. The train picked up speed, diving into the tunnel, and Marcus realized with sickening clarity that he'd just made the worst tactical decision of his life. He'd split up from his only ally, walked straight into a surveillance net, and left Amira alone with evidence that could either save them or bury them depending on who got to it first. The woman near the doors glanced up from her phone. Her eyes met his for just a second, and the corner of her mouth twitched. She knew. Marcus forced himself to look away, to act like he hadn't noticed, but his mind was racing. 2 stops until Union Station. Maybe 3. He could get off early, try to backtrack, but that would just confirm their suspicions. Or he could ride it out, get to the locker, and hope Amira had the sense to abort if she smelled trouble. The train slowed for the next stop. Marcus stood, moving toward the doors like he was just another commuter getting off. The woman didn't follow. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. He stepped onto the platform, letting the crowd swallow him, and headed for the exit. Every instinct told him to run, to put distance between himself and the people hunting them, but running would just make it worse. So he walked, calm, steady, like he had every right to be there. He made it halfway to the stairs before someone grabbed his arm. "Sergeant Webb." It was Harding, the FBI agent from the hospital, looking significantly less tired and significantly more pissed off. "We need to talk." Marcus tried to pull free, but Harding's grip was iron. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends on the next words out of your mouth." Harding gestured toward the exit. "Walk with me." They moved through the station, Harding keeping a hand on Marcus's elbow like he might bolt at any second. Two more agents fell in behind them, boxing him in, and Marcus felt the walls closing in. "Where is she?" Harding asked as they climbed the stairs to street level. "I don't know." "That's the wrong answer." They emerged into morning sunlight, and Marcus squinted against the glare. A black SUV was waiting at the curb, engine running, and Harding steered him toward it. "We know you met with Nadia Karimi last night," Harding said. "We know you left the hospital together, and we know you just helped her evade federal surveillance. That's obstruction at minimum, possibly aiding a fugitive depending on what she's running from. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is she?" Marcus's mind raced. If they'd been watching him since the hospital, they knew about his apartment. They probably had Amira's laptop, the USB drives, all the evidence she'd spent 2 years collecting. And if they'd already branded her a suspect, they weren't going to listen to anything she'd found. They'd bury it, call it the desperate fabrications of a woman trying to avoid prosecution, unless Marcus gave them a reason to look closer. "She's not running from you," he said. "She's running because she's got intel on the people who hit those hospitals, and she knew you wouldn't believe her." Harding stopped walking. "What kind of intel?" "Names, locations. A network that's been operating inside the U.S. for at least a year." Marcus met his eyes. "She's not your suspect. She's your best lead." For a long moment, Harding just stared at him, and Marcus could see the calculation happening behind those tired eyes. Then he pulled out his phone, hit a number, and said, "Hold the intercept. I need 15 minutes. He hung up and looked at Marcus. "Start talking, and it better be good." Marcus told him everything: the hack collective, the supply orders, the 4 men working in VA facilities. He left out the part about Amira's real identity. If Harding didn't already know she was Dr. Hassan, Marcus wasn't about to hand him that ammunition. But he laid out the evidence, the connections, the pattern that pointed to something bigger than one rogue nurse with a grudge. When he finished, Harding was quiet for a long time. "This intel," he said finally. "Where is it now?" "Union Station, locker 247. "And Miss Karimi?" "On her way there." Harding nodded slowly, then gestured to one of the other agents. "Get a team to Union Station. Lock down all exits, but don't move in until I give the word. And pull the surveillance footage from the last hour. I want to know everyone who's come and gone from that locker." The agent jogged off, already talking into his radio. Harding turned back to Marcus. "You just bet your career on a woman who's been lying about who she is for 3 years, he said. "Hope you're right about her." "Me too," Marcus said. They drove to Union Station in silence, Harding up front, Marcus in the back with his hands resting on his knees and his heart trying to punch through his rib cage. The streets were clogged with morning traffic, and every red light felt like an eternity. He kept thinking about Amira, alone in a train station crawling with federal agents, carrying evidence that could either clear her name or seal her fate. If she'd gotten there first and already grabbed the burner phone, she might have called Lawson by now. Might have set up the meet with his DOD contact and gotten clear before the net closed. But if she'd been delayed, if the tail had caught up with her, if any one of 1,000 things had gone wrong. The SUV pulled up to the station's main entrance, and Harding's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then swore quietly. "What?" Marcus asked. "She's already inside. My team spotted her near the lockers 5 minutes ago." Harding shoved the phone back in his pocket. "She's trying to access 247 right now." They moved fast, Harding in the lead, Marcus limping to keep up, pain shooting through his leg with every step. The station was a controlled chaos of commuters and tourists, everyone trying to get somewhere and no one paying attention to the federal agents cutting through the crowd like sharks. Marcus saw her before Harding did. She was standing in front of the locker bank, backpack slung over one shoulder, punching in the combination with hands that shook just enough to betray her nerves. The locker popped open. She reached inside. "Nadia Karimi!" Harding's voice cut through the noise like a gunshot. "FBI! Keep your hands where I can see them!" Amira froze. For one terrible second, Marcus thought she was going to run. Then her shoulders sagged, and she slowly raised her hands, still holding the burner phone Lawson had left for them. Agents swarmed in from 3 directions, weapons drawn, shouting commands that overlapped into incomprehensible noise. Amira didn't resist. She let them take the phone, let them pull the backpack off her shoulders, let them cuff her hands behind her back with the kind of efficiency that came from doing this 100 times before. Her eyes found Marcus across the crowd, and the look on her face broke something in him. She'd trusted him, and he'd led the Fed straight to her. Harding walked over to the open locker, pulling out the cash Lawson had left. "Going somewhere?" Amira didn't answer. "Take her to the field office," Harding told one of the agents. "Full workup, prints, photos, background check, and get me everything off that laptop. I want to know who she's been talking to and what she's been planning." "Wait." Marcus started forward, but another agent blocked his path. "You've done enough, Sergeant," Harding said without looking at him. "Go home. We'll call if we need anything else. She's telling the truth about the intel. I'll be the judge of that." They hauled Amira away, still silent, and Marcus could only watch as she disappeared into a waiting SUV that pulled away from the curb with the kind of speed that said this conversation was over. The crowd had already moved on, absorbed back into their routines, and within 30 seconds, it was like nothing had happened. Marcus stood there, leg bleeding through his jeans again, watching the taillights fade into traffic. His phone, the burner from the locker that an agent had dropped in the confusion, buzzed on the ground near his feet. He picked it up. One new message from Lawson. What the hell just happened? Before Marcus could answer, a different number flashed across the screen. Unknown. He almost didn't answer, but something made him hit the green button. A voice he didn't recognize, male, accented, spoke in careful English. "Sergeant Webb, you have made a very serious mistake. The woman you just helped arrest, she knows too much, and now, so do you." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, ice flooding his veins, as the reality of what he'd just done crashed down around him. He hadn't saved Amira. He'd painted a target on both their backs. And whoever was on the other end of that call, whoever had his number, knew his name, and tracked him to a burner phone that should have been untraceable. They were already moving. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. The feds had her laptop. They had the USB drives. They had every name, every location, every piece of evidence she'd collected over 2 years, which meant the Hawk Collective now knew exactly how much the authorities knew, exactly which of their people had been compromised, and exactly how much time they had to clean house before the hammer fell. And Amira was sitting in a federal holding cell, completely unprotected, with her real identity about to be exposed. Marcus looked down at the burner phone, at the message from Lawson still waiting for a response, and realized he'd just started a clock he had no idea how to stop. Marcus typed back to Lawson with shaking hands. "They got her. Need extraction." The response came in seconds. "Sit tight. Working it. Sit tight." Like that was an option when someone on the other end of a ghost call had just made it clear they knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. Marcus pocketed the burner and started moving, not toward home, that was compromised, but toward the only place in D.C. he could think of where federal surveillance might actually hesitate to follow. The Veterans Crisis Line office on K Street operated out of a nondescript building wedged between a Starbucks and a dry cleaner. Marcus had volunteered there twice after getting out, answering phones from guys who couldn't sleep, couldn't adjust, couldn't stop seeing the things they'd done. He hated every second of it. Listening to strangers fall apart reminded him too much of his own bad nights. But he'd kept the key card they'd given him, and right now that piece of plastic was worth more than gold. He swiped in through the back entrance, taking the stairs to the 3rd floor, where the call center hummed with quiet voices and ringing phones. A woman he recognized, Linda, maybe Lisa, something with an L, looked up from her desk. "Marcus? Didn't know you were on shift today." "I'm not. Just need to use a computer for a minute." She frowned but didn't push. People came here with baggage, and you learn not to ask questions that might tip someone over an edge they were already standing on. "Station 4's open. Help yourself." He logged in using his volunteer credentials and pulled up a secure browser, fingers flying across the keyboard. If the Hawk Collective had his burner number, they had access to intelligence networks that shouldn't exist outside government servers, which meant someone inside was feeding them information. Someone with clearance, with access, with a reason to keep the pipeline open. Marcus started with the basics, cross-referencing the names Amira had flagged against State Department visa records. The 4 men she'd identified had all entered the U.S. between 2021 and 2022, processed through the Special Immigrant Visa Program for Afghan nationals who'd assisted coalition forces. Clean backgrounds. Letters of recommendation from American officers. Everything by the book. Except one of them, Rashida Mahdi, currently working security at the North Carolina VFSA facility, had a reference letter signed by a Major Whitmore that didn't match any personnel records Marcus could find. The signature looked legitimate, the letterhead was correct, but Major Whitmore himself had died in a helicopter crash 3 months before the letter was dated. Someone had forged credentials for a dead officer and used them to get an asset into the United States. Marcus kept digging, pulling up employment records, background checks, anything that might show a pattern. And there it was. All 4 men had been processed by the same case officer at state. A woman named Rebecca Lorne, mid-level bureaucrat, 12 years in the department, no red flags in her file except for one detail that made Marcus's stomach turn. She'd taken a 3-month leave of absence in 2020 for medical reasons and returned to work assigned to a desk job in the visa division. He pulled up her travel records. She'd gone to Turkey during that leave, Istanbul specifically. And while medical records were sealed, her credit card showed charges at a private hospital specializing in trauma surgery. Istanbul was also where a lot of wounded fighters from Syria and Afghanistan went when they needed treatment they couldn't get at home. Marcus sat back, the pieces sliding into place like a weapon being assembled. Lorne had been compromised, maybe captured, maybe coerced, maybe just bought. But somewhere along the line, she'd started processing visa applications for people who had no business getting into the country, and she'd used her position to create a pipeline that the Hawk Collective had been exploiting for years. The question was, did the FBI know? Marcus pulled out the burner and called Lawson. "Tell me you've got something," Lawson answered without preamble. "I've got a name. Rebecca Lorne, State Department Visa Division. She's dirty." "You sure?" 90%. But if I'm right, she's been feeding intel to the same people who just threatened me, which means Amira's evidence is probably already sanitized or discredited before the feds even finish reviewing it. Lawson swore. "Where are you?" "K Street. Veterans Office." "Stay there. My DOD contact is en route. His name's Colonel Briggs, Counterintelligence. He'll want to see what you've got." Lawson paused. "And Marcus, watch your back. If they burned you, they'll burn everyone connected to you." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the screen, at Rebecca Lorne's government ID photo, blonde, 42, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, and felt the weight of what he'd just stepped into. This wasn't just about Amira anymore. This was about a compromised intelligence pipeline, about people dying because someone in the system had sold them out, about a threat that the very people supposed to stop it might not even recognize. And Amira was sitting in an FBI holding cell with a target on her back and no idea the clock was already ticking down. Colonel Briggs arrived 30 minutes later, no fanfare, just a lean man in his 50s wearing jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt that screamed off duty but didn't quite hide the bulge of a sidearm under his jacket. He shook Marcus's hand once, sat down at the computer, and started reading without saying a word. After 5 minutes, he looked up. "Where'd you get this?" "The woman the FBI arrested this morning. She's been tracking the network for 2 years. "And she is?" Marcus hesitated. Telling Briggs about Amira's real identity meant exposing the one secret she'd fought to protect, but keeping it hidden meant letting her rot in federal custody while the people hunting her closed in. "Dr. Amira Hassan," he said quietly, "officially KIA in Afghanistan, 2021. Unofficially, she survived and went underground after being held by the Hawk Collective." Briggs's expression didn't change. "The FBI know who they've got?" "Not yet. Her current ID is clean, but once they run her prints through IAFIS, it's over." "How long?" 48 hours, maybe less." Briggs pulled out his phone, typed something, then put it away. "I'm going to need to verify this independently before I take it up the chain. But if what you're showing me is accurate, we've got a major security breach and multiple active threats, which means I need to talk to Dr. Hassan, face to face." "She's in federal custody." "I'm aware. That's why I need you to get her out." Marcus stared at him. "You want me to break a federal suspect out of FBI detention?" "I want you to facilitate a transfer." Briggs leaned back, arms crossed. "I've got the authority to request custody of a material witness in a counterintelligence investigation. The FBI will push back, but I can make it stick if I move fast. Problem is, the paperwork takes time, and time is something we don't have. He met Marcus's eyes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to that field office and convince Agent Harding that Dr. Hassan needs protective custody. You're going to tell him her life is in immediate danger, that she's got intel on an active threat, and that DOD needs access to her before anyone else does. You sell it hard enough, he might release her into your custody pending my official request. And if he doesn't, then we lose the only person who knows where all the bodies are buried, and this whole thing goes sideways. Briggs stood. Lawson says you're solid, that you won't fold under pressure. So I'm trusting you to make this happen. Why me? You're a colonel. You've got resources. Because I can't be seen walking into an FBI field office and demanding a prisoner transfer without cause. That tips my hand, alerts the wrong people, and gets people killed. Briggs headed for the door, then stopped. You've got 2 hours before my official request hits their desk. Make them count. He left, and Marcus sat there feeling like he'd just been handed a live grenade with the pin already pulled. The FBI field office on 4th Street looked exactly like what it was. A fortress designed to keep people out and information in. Marcus walked through the front entrance, gave his name to the security desk, and waited while they verified he wasn't on a watch list. 20 minutes later, Harding appeared, looking even more tired than he had at Union Station. Sergeant Webb, didn't expect to see you again so soon. I need to talk to you about Nadia Karimi. Harding's expression hardened. She's being processed. You can't see her. I don't need to see her. I need you to release her into protective custody. Now. That got his attention. On what grounds? On the grounds that her life is in immediate danger and you don't have the resources to protect her. Harding crossed his arms. From who? The same people who bombed 3 VA hospitals. The same network she's been tracking for 2 years. They know she's got intel on them. They know you've got her laptop. And they're going to move to sanitize the evidence and eliminate the witness before you even finish your investigation. Marcus kept his voice level, professional, like he was briefing a commanding officer instead of lying to a federal agent. I've got a DOD counterintelligence officer ready to take her into custody and extract actionable intelligence in the next 2 hours. But if she stays here, she's a sitting duck. DOD doesn't have jurisdiction over a domestic terrorism case. They do if it involves foreign nationals with ties to hostile intelligence services. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Harding the data he'd compiled on Rebecca Lorne. State Department case officer, compromised. She's been processing visas for hot collective assets for at least 3 years, and one of them just called me on a burner phone that should have been untraceable. That tells me they've got reach inside federal systems, which means whoever's holding Dr. Hassan's evidence right now might already be feeding it back to the people we're trying to stop. Harding took the phone, scanning the information with the kind of focus that came from 2 decades of chasing threats most people never heard about. When he looked up, his face was unreadable. This is solid? Solid enough to get people killed if we don't move fast. For a long moment, Harding just stared at him, and Marcus could see the calculation happening. Trust the word of a staff sergeant who'd already obstructed one investigation, or play it safe and keep a suspect in custody while the bureaucracy ground through its usual pace. Give me 10 minutes, Harding said finally, then disappeared back into the building. Marcus waited, every second stretching into eternity, watching people come and go through the lobby. Agents, lawyers, civilians with that haunted look that came from being on the wrong side of an interrogation. His leg throbbed, his head pounded, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice kept whispering that he was in way over his head, that this was the kind of play that ended careers and started investigations, that he should walk away before he got burned too. But he didn't. 15 minutes later, Harding returned with Amira beside him. She looked smaller somehow, pale and exhausted, wrists marked red from where the cuffs had been. Her eyes found Marcus, and something flickered there. Relief, maybe? Or just exhaustion so deep it looked like relief. She's your problem now, Harding said, handing Marcus a clipboard with release forms. Protective custody, pending DOD transfer request. You've got 24 hours before I come looking for her. And Webb, he waited until Marcus looked up. If this goes south, it's on you. Marcus signed the forms. Understood. They walked out together, Amira silent beside him, and didn't speak until they were 2 blocks away from the building. Then she grabbed his arm, pulling him into an alley that smelled like old grease and rainwater. What the hell did you just do? Got you out? By lying to the FBI? By telling them the truth. Your life's in danger. The Hawk Collective knows you've been tracking them, and they're going to come for you. Her face went white. How do you know that? Because they already called me. Marcus showed her the burner, the unknown number still sitting in the call log like a loaded weapon. They know who I am. They know who you are. And they know we're running out of time. She looked at the phone, then at him, and for the first time since he'd met her in that ER, she looked genuinely scared. What do? We meet with Colonel Briggs. We hand over everything you've got, and we let DOD handle it. And if they can't? Then we handle it ourselves. It was a stupid thing to say. 2 people against a network that had killed 14 and wounded 32 in a single coordinated strike. But Amira nodded like it made perfect sense. Maybe because she was too tired to argue. Maybe because she'd already survived worse and figured this was just one more impossible situation in a long line of them. They caught a cab to a storage facility in Arlington where Lawson had arranged a safe house. Unit 2847, climate-controlled, accessible 24 hours. Inside was a cot, a mini-fridge, and enough surveillance equipment to outfit a small intelligence operation. Briggs was already there, setting up a laptop connected to a secure server. Dr. Hassan. He didn't offer his hand. I need everything you've got on the Hawk Collective. Names, locations, financial transactions, communication intercepts. All of it. Amira pulled the USB drives from her backpack, 3 of them, each labeled with dates and categories. This is 2 years of work, cross-referenced medical records, injury patterns, supply chain analysis. I've identified 12 active cells operating in 7 states, all connected back to a central coordination node somewhere in the DC area. Briggs plugged in the first drive and started reviewing files, his expression getting grimmer with each screen. You did this alone? I had access, I had time, and I had motivation. She sat on the cot, looking like she might fall asleep mid-sentence. The people who held me in Kandahar didn't just disappear after the withdrawal, they evolved. They're not trying to hold territory anymore. They're trying to destabilize from within. Hit military infrastructure, erode public trust, make people question whether the system can protect them. And the bombings were phase 1, Briggs said quietly. I think so, but I don't know what phase 2 looks like. Marcus's phone, the burner, buzzed. He pulled it out, and his blood turned to ice. New message, same unknown number. You have 6 hours to return what you took, or the next attack kills 100. He showed it to Briggs, who read it twice before looking up. They're bluffing. Are they? Marcus shot back. Because they hit 3 hospitals simultaneously without breaking a sweat. You really want to bet they can't do worse? What do they want? Amira asked, voice shaking. The evidence. They want everything you collected so they can scrub it before it goes public. Briggs stood, pacing the small space like a caged animal. Which means they're scared. They wouldn't be making threats if they thought they could just disappear and start over somewhere else. So we've got leverage, Marcus said. We've got a ticking clock. Briggs stopped pacing. 6 hours isn't enough time to coordinate a multi-agency response. I can get DOD assets in play, but FBI, DHS, local law enforcement, they all need briefings, clearances, coordination. By the time we're ready to move, the deadline's passed. Then we don't wait for coordination. Amira was on her feet now, exhaustion replaced by something harder. We find them first. We hit them before they can launch phase 2. With what? Briggs gestured at the 3 of them. I'm one colonel with limited authority. You're a fugitive with a fake name. And he's a staff sergeant with a bleeding leg and a questionable decision-making track record. We're not exactly a strike team. No, Marcus said slowly, an idea forming. But we know something they don't. What's that? They think we're running. They think we're scared. They don't expect us to come looking for them. He turned to Amira. You said the coordination node is somewhere in DC. How sure are you? 80%. I tracked communication patterns, cell phone metadata, financial transactions. Everything points to a central hub coordinating the attacks, but I never pinpointed the exact location. Can you narrow it down? She thought about it. Maybe. If I had access to real-time signal intelligence, I could triangulate based on the call you just received. They're cocky enough to use active phones, which means they're leaving a trail. Briggs pulled out his phone. I can get you into NSA's PRISM database, but it's going to burn every favor I've got. And if this goes wrong, I'm done. If this goes wrong, we're all done, Marcus said. So let's make sure it doesn't. Briggs made the call. 20 minutes later, they had access to an intelligence feed that probably violated 6 different laws and definitely wasn't something a colonel should be sharing with civilians. Amira worked the laptop like she'd been doing this her whole life, pulling metadata from the phone call, cross-referencing it with historical communication patterns, building a digital map of the network in real time. Got it, she said finally, pointing to a cluster of signals originating from a building in southeast D.C. Warehouse district near the Anacostia River. That's your coordination hub. Briggs zoomed in on the satellite imagery. Industrial area. Lots of cover. Multiple exit routes. If they're smart, they've got lookouts and fallback positions. So we go in hard and fast, Marcus said. With what? We don't have a tactical team, we don't have warrants, and we sure as hell don't have authorization to conduct a raid on American soil. Then we get creative. Marcus looked at Amira. How many people do you think are in there? Based on the communication volume? 4 to 6 active operators, maybe more in reserve. And they're expecting us to fold, to hand over the evidence and hope they let us live. Marcus felt something cold and focused settle into his chest, the same clarity that came in combat when the shooting started, and there was no more room for doubt. So we give them what they want, we show up, hand over a USB drive, and when they're distracted verifying it, we take them down. That's insane, Briggs said. You have a better idea? Silence. I can get a tactical team spun up in 4 hours, Briggs said finally. But that puts us past the deadline. Then we don't wait for a team. We go now, the 3 of us, and we end this before anyone else dies. Marcus looked at Amira. You up for this? She should have said no, should have pointed out that she was a doctor, not a soldier, that she'd spent 3 years hiding precisely to avoid situations like this. But instead she nodded, jaw set. I didn't survive Kandahar just to get killed in a warehouse by the same people who held me prisoner. Let's go. Briggs looked at both of them like they'd lost their minds. Then he opened a locked case in the corner of the storage unit and started pulling out weapons. 2 Glock 19s, a tactical shotgun, spare magazines, body armor that had seen better days. If we're doing this, he said, we're doing it right. Webb, you're on point. Hassan, you stay behind us and keep your head down. I'll cover the rear and call for backup the second we have confirmation of hostiles. We go in quiet, assess the situation, and if it looks bad, we pull back. No heroics. No last stands. We're gathering intel, not starting a war. What about the deadline? Amir asked. Briggs checked his watch. 5 hours, 12 minutes. We've got time. They didn't. The warehouse was a squat concrete block surrounded by chain link and rusted shipping containers. The kind of place where businesses went to die quietly. They parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through shadows that smelled like diesel and decay. Marcus's legs screamed with every step, but adrenaline was doing most of the work now, overriding pain with the kind of chemical focus that made everything sharp and clear. Briggs held up a fist. They stopped. 2 entrances, he whispered, pointing. Front loading bay, back fire exit. I'll take the back, you take the front. Hassan stays outside as lookout. We go in 60 seconds. Marcus nodded, checking his weapon. 17 rounds, 1 in the chamber. Briggs disappeared around the side of the building, and Marcus counted down from 60 in his head, watching the front entrance for movement. At 0, he moved. The loading bay door was unlocked, which should have been the first warning. Marcus eased it open, weapon up, scanning for threats in the darkness beyond. Empty. Just rows of old pallets and abandoned equipment, everything covered in dust thick enough to show his footprints. He moved deeper, following the sound of voices coming from somewhere in the back. 2 men, speaking in Pashto, their words echoing off concrete walls. Marcus couldn't understand the language, but the tone was clear. They were waiting for something, or someone. He rounded a corner and found them. 2 men sitting at a folding table, laptops open, surrounded by enough communications equipment to run a small cell network. Neither was armed that he could see, but that didn't mean weapons weren't close by. Marcus stepped out of cover, Glock trained on the nearest man's center mass. Hands where I can see them. Both men froze. Then the one on the left smiled. Sergeant Webb, right on time. That's when Marcus realized he'd walked straight into a trap. The lights came on, blinding and sudden, and he spun to find 4 more men behind him, weapons raised, and Briggs being dragged in through the back entrance by 2 guys built like brick walls. His hands were zip-tied, face already bleeding from where someone had hit him. The man at the table stood slowly, still smiling. "You were supposed to bring the evidence. Where's Dr. Hassan?" Marcus said nothing. "No matter. We'll find her." The man gestured, and one of the gunmen stepped forward, grabbing Marcus's weapon and forcing him to his knees. "You understand you've made this much harder than it needed to be. We gave you a simple choice: return what you stole and live. But you chose to play hero instead." "Screw you," Marcus spat. The man sighed. Predictable. He pulled out a phone, typed something, then showed Marcus the screen. It was a photo of Amira, standing outside the warehouse exactly where they'd left her, illuminated by headlights from a vehicle that had just pulled up. "Your friend is resourceful," the man said, "but not careful. We've been tracking her since she left FBI custody. Did you really think we didn't have people inside?" Marcus's stomach dropped. They'd been played from the start. The call, the deadline, the threat. It had all been designed to flush them out, to get them away from federal protection and into a place where they could be eliminated quietly. And he'd walked right into it. The man put his phone away. "Bring her in, and make sure she brings the evidence." One of the gunmen jogged toward the entrance, and Marcus tried to lunge forward, tried to do something, anything, but someone hit him from behind and the world went dark around the edges. When his vision cleared, Amira was being dragged into the warehouse, backpack ripped from her shoulders, thrown to the floor next to Briggs. She looked at Marcus, and the terror in her eyes was worse than any wound he'd ever taken. "I'm sorry," he managed to say. "Touching," the man said, unzipping her backpack and pulling out the USB drives. "But unnecessary. You've served your purpose, all of you." He plugged one of the drives into his laptop, and his smile widened as the files loaded. 2 years of work. Impressive, Dr. Hassan. Or should I call you Dr. Amira? The explosion cut him off. It came from somewhere outside, a deep concussive blast that shook the building and sent dust raining from the rafters. The gunman spun toward the noise, and in that moment of confusion, Briggs moved. He swept the legs out from under the nearest guard, rolled, and came up with the man's dropped weapon. 3 shots, 3 bodies down, and suddenly the warehouse was chaos, shouting, "Return fire," the crack of gunfire echoing off concrete. Marcus grabbed Amira and dove behind a stack of pallets as rounds tore through the air where they'd been kneeling. Briggs was pinned down behind an overturned table, trading shots with the remaining guards, and the man who'd been interrogating them was running for the back exit, laptop clutched under his arm. "Go!" Briggs shouted. "I'll cover you!" Marcus didn't argue. He grabbed Amira's hand and ran, half dragging her toward the loading bay as bullets chewed into the walls around them. They burst out into the night air, and Marcus saw the source of the explosion, a burning vehicle 50 yards away, black smoke pouring into the sky. And standing in front of it, holding a detonator and wearing a grin that belonged in a psych ward, was Lawson. "Figured you could use a distraction," he said, then tossed Marcus a spare Glock. "Now let's finish this before the cops show up." Inside the warehouse, the shooting had stopped. Briggs emerged a moment later, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but otherwise intact. 4 down, 2 ran. They've got the evidence." "Not all of it," Amira said, pulling a 4th USB drive from inside her jacket. "I'm not an idiot. I kept a backup." Lawson laughed. "I like her." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. They had maybe 2 minutes before the whole area was swarming with police. And if they were still here when that happened, no amount of explaining would save them from arrest. "We need to move," Briggs said. "Now." They ran. 3 blocks, then 4, lungs burning, legs screaming, and behind them the warehouse was lighting up with red and blue strobes as the first responders arrived. Marcus's vision tunneled, his leg finally giving out, and he would have gone down if Lawson hadn't caught him. "Stay with me, Webb." They made it to Lawson's vehicle, a beat-up SUV that looked like it had survived a war zone, and piled in. Lawson threw it into gear, and they were moving, blending into late-night traffic while the chaos receded behind them. Nobody spoke for 5 minutes. Then Amira broke the silence. "They got 2 of the drives. The ones with most of the network data. But we've got the locations, Briggs said, pulling out his phone. And now I've got cause to move. I'm calling this in. Full DOD response. Coordinated strikes on every cell you identified. They wanted a war. They're going to get one. He made the call, and Marcus listened as the colonel rattled off coordinates, asset locations, threat assessments with the kind of clinical precision that came from doing this 100 times before. When he hung up, his face was grim. Strikes go live in 90 minutes. Every cell simultaneously. We're burning the whole network to the ground. What about Rebecca Lornig? Marcus asked. Already in custody. FBI picked her up 20 minutes ago based on the intel you provided. She's talking, which means we're about to unravel 3 years of compromised operations and roll up everyone she touched. Briggs looked at Amira. You did that. Your work, your evidence, it's going to save lives. Amira didn't look relieved. She looked hollow. How many died because I waited too long to come forward? That's not on you, Marcus said. Isn't it? Before he could answer, Lawson's phone rang. He answered, listened, then went very still. Say that again. Whatever he heard made his face go pale. He hung up and met Briggs's eyes in the rearview mirror. We've got a problem. One of the cells we just identified. It's not waiting for Phase 2. They're moving now. Target is Fort McNair Main Hospital, and they're already inside. Fort McNair sat on a peninsula in southwest D.C. He home to the National Defense University and a military hospital that treated active duty personnel and their families. If a cell hit it during visiting hours, the casualties would make the first round of bombings look like a warm-up. How long? Briggs demanded. Unknown. Could be minutes, could be hours. But they're in position and the threat is credible. Briggs grabbed his phone again, already dialing. I need a full lockdown on Fort McNair right now. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore, because he'd just seen something on Lawson's GPS that made his blood run cold. They were less than 3 miles from the fort, and sitting in traffic that wasn't moving, with emergency vehicles screaming past them toward the same destination, he realized they weren't going to make it in time to stop what was about to happen, unless they got there first. Lawson, Marcus said quietly, how fast can this thing move off-road? Lawson looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Then he grinned. Fast enough. Why? Because we're not waiting for DOD to handle this. Marcus checked his weapon, still had a full magazine, and Briggs had given him 2 spares. We're going in, right now. That's suicide, Briggs said. So's sitting here while people die. Amir's hand found his. I'm with you. Lawson yanked the wheel hard right, jumping the curb and tearing across a park that definitely wasn't meant for vehicles. Trees whipped past, someone screamed as they scattered out of the way. And then they were through, bouncing onto a side street that led straight to the fort's east gate. Ahead, smoke was already rising. The smoke was coming from the hospital's east wing, thick and black, pouring out of shattered windows on the second floor. Lawson slammed the brakes 30 yards from the main entrance, and they were out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, Marcus's bad leg nearly buckling as his boots hit pavement. Military police were already converging on the building, weapons drawn, shouting orders that got lost in the chaos of people streaming out, nurses in scrubs, patients in wheelchairs, visitors carrying children who were crying from the confusion and the smoke. No one was coordinating the evacuation. No one seemed to know if the threat was over or just beginning. We need to get inside, Marcus said, but a corporal blocked his path, hand up. Sir, building's compromised. Nobody goes in until EOD clears. Briggs flashed credentials that made the corporal's eyes go wide. Colonel Briggs, DOD Counterintelligence. These people are with me, and we have actionable intelligence on the attack. Stand aside. The corporal hesitated, then stepped back. They pushed through the entrance into a lobby thick with smoke and the chemical stink of burning plastic. The sprinkler system had activated, water raining down and turning the tile floors into a skating rink. Marcus could hear shouting from deeper in the building, someone screaming for a medic, and underneath it all the steady wail of fire alarms. Where's the device? Briggs shouted over the noise. Amira pulled out her phone, checking something on the screen, signal data, GPS coordinates. Marcus couldn't tell. Second floor, east wing. If they're following the same pattern as the other attacks, they planted it in a utility closet near the HVAC system to maximize dispersion. Dispersion of what? I don't know. Could be explosives, could be something worse. They hit the stairwell at a run, taking steps two at a time, and burst onto the second floor into a hallway choked with smoke so thick Marcus couldn't see 10 feet ahead. He pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose, trying to filter the air, but it was like breathing through wet cotton. A figure stumbled out of the smoke, an orderly, face streaked with soot, coughing hard enough to shake his whole body. Lawson caught him before he collapsed. "How many people still in there?" The orderly couldn't speak, just pointed down the hall and kept coughing. Lawson lowered him to the floor, and they kept moving, following the trail of water from the sprinklers that ran like a river toward the east wing. They found the utility closet standing open, door blown off its hinges by a small explosive charge that had taken out the lock, but not much else. Inside, sitting on a metal shelf between cleaning supplies and spare light bulbs, was a metal cylinder about the size of a fire extinguisher, topped with a crude timer counting down. 4 minutes, 38 seconds. "That's not a bomb," Amira said, moving closer. "It's a dispersal device." "For what?" Marcus asked, but she was already reaching for it, examining the mechanism without touching anything that might trigger a failsafe. "Chemical agent, probably chlorine gas or something aerosolized. The initial explosion was just to breach the HVAC and create panic. This is the real threat. Once it goes off, it'll pump whatever's inside through the ventilation system and flood the entire building." Briggs was on his phone again, barking orders. "I need a hazmat team at Fort McNair Hospital, second floor east wing, right now. We've got a chemical dispersal device with," he checked the timer, "4 minutes to detonation. Can you disarm it?" Marcus asked Amira. She was staring at the device like it was a puzzle she'd seen before but couldn't quite remember how to solve. "Maybe. The timer's crude, probably pressure switch activated. If I can access the battery compartment without triggering the pressure sensor." Her hands hovered over the casing, not quite touching. "I need tools. Wire cutters, needle nose pliers, something." Lawson was already running back toward the stairwell. "On it." 3 minutes, 52 seconds. Marcus watched Amira work, her face inches from a device that could kill everyone in the building, and realized this was what she'd been doing for the last 2 years, getting close to threats that would destroy her if she made one wrong move, documenting them, mapping them, trying to stop them before they detonated. And nobody had known. Nobody had helped. She'd done it alone because she thought she had to, because the alternative was admitting who she really was and watching everything she'd built get torn apart by the same people who should have protected her. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yeah, I do." Her hands were steady despite the countdown screaming at them from the LED display. "This is what I'm good at, fixing things that are broken before they kill someone." 3 minutes, 18 seconds. Lawson came back with a maintenance kit he'd grabbed from somewhere, tools clattering as he dumped them on the floor. Amira grabbed wire cutters and a screwdriver, fitting the tip into a seam along the cylinder's base. "If I'm wrong about the pressure sensor," she said, not looking up, "this thing goes off immediately, so you might want to step back." Marcus didn't move. Neither did Briggs or Lawson. She popped the casing open. Nothing exploded. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Inside was a battery pack wired to the timer and a small pneumatic release valve connected to the chemical reservoir. Amira traced the wires with her finger, mapping the circuit in her head. "Okay, timer's connected to the valve through a relay switch. I can bypass the switch and disable the timer, but I have to cut the power without disrupting the circuit or the failsafe triggers. Can you do it? Ask me in 2 minutes." She worked in silence, everyone holding their breath, and Marcus found himself thinking about Rollins, about how he'd died searching for a woman who'd already saved herself, about how the army had spent 6 months and untold resources looking for a ghost when they should have been listening to the people who'd survived, about how the system was built to protect rank and protocol instead of people, and how much damage that caused when the protocols were wrong. 2 minutes, 4 seconds. Amira cut the first wire. The timer kept counting. She cut the second, still counting. Third wire. The display flickered. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. 1 minute, 31 seconds. Fourth wire. The countdown froze at 1:27, then went dark. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Amira sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her face with a shaking hand. "Done. It's safe." Briggs was already on the phone again, calling in the hazmat team to extract and analyze the chemical payload. Marcus helped Amira to her feet, and she leaned against him for just a second before pulling herself upright, professional mask back in place. "We need to clear the building," she said. "Make sure there aren't any secondary devices." But Marcus was looking at something else, at the wall behind where the cylinder had been sitting, where someone had spray-painted a message in Arabic script. He couldn't read it, but Briggs could. The colonel's face went pale. "We need to go, now." "What does it say?" "It says this is the decoy." The real device detonated in the parking garage beneath the hospital. A shaped charge that took out 3 support columns and sent half the building's west wing collapsing into the crater it left behind. The sound was like the world ending, a deep bass rumble that shook the ground and turned windows into shrapnel, followed by the grinding shriek of concrete and steel folding in on itself. Marcus hit the floor as the hallway buckled, grabbing Amira and pulling her down with him while dust and debris rained from the ceiling. Somewhere close by, someone was screaming. The sprinklers had stopped working. Emergency lights flickered and died, plunging everything into darkness, cut only by the daylight streaming through gaps where walls used to be. When the shaking stopped, Marcus's ears were ringing so hard he couldn't tell if the silence was real or just shock. He pushed himself up, checking for injuries, cuts and bruises, nothing broken, and found Amira doing the same. Lawson was on his feet, helping Briggs, who'd taken a piece of falling ceiling tile to the shoulder but seemed otherwise intact. "Casualties?" Briggs coughed out. They didn't know. Half the west wing was gone, just a smoking hole where 3 floors of hospital had been moments before. If anyone had been in the parking garage when it blew, they were gone. And if the evacuation hadn't cleared the upper floors in time, Marcus didn't let himself finish that thought. They made their way down to the ground floor, navigating through wreckage and past people huddled in corners, shell-shocked and bleeding. Outside, the scene was chaos. Military police setting up a perimeter, firefighters battling blazes in 3 different sections of the building, medics triaging the injured on the lawn. Helicopters circled overhead, news crews already arriving to broadcast the devastation to a country that was just starting to understand how deep the threat ran. Briggs found the ranking officer on scene, a major who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "How many?" "Don't know yet. We're still pulling people out." The major's voice was hollow. "First responders are saying it could be worse than all 3 previous attacks combined." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. They'd stopped the chemical dispersal, but they'd missed the real threat. The decoy had worked exactly as intended, drawing them in, making them think they'd won, while the actual device did what it was designed to do. And somewhere out there, the people responsible were watching the news coverage and celebrating. "We need the names," Marcus said to Amira. "Everyone in the network. Every cell, every asset, everyone who had access to make this happen. Because if we don't roll them up right now, they're going to disappear and we'll spend the next 10 years chasing ghosts." She pulled out the backup USB drive, somehow still intact despite everything, and handed it to Briggs. "It's all there. 12 cells, 43 identified operators, and the coordination structure that links them back to 3 primary handlers." "Who are the handlers?" "That's the part I couldn't figure out. They use cutouts and proxies, never direct contact. But one of them has to be someone with high-level access to military installations, someone who knows our security protocols well enough to circumvent them." Briggs took the drive, plugging it into his phone and scrolling through the data. His expression got darker with each screen. "This is comprehensive. If even half of this checks out, we're looking at the largest domestic terror network since Oklahoma City." "It all checks out," Amira said flatly. "I spent 2 years making sure." "Then we use it." Briggs was already making calls, coordinating with DoD, FBI, DHS, every agency with the authority to move on this. Marcus listened as he rattled off names and locations, watched as the machinery of the federal government finally kicked into gear, and felt a grim satisfaction knowing that the people who'd caused this were about to find out what happened when they pushed too hard. But there was still one piece missing. "Rebecca Lorne," Marcus said. "She's been feeding them information, which means she knows who the handlers are." Briggs covered his phone. "FBI's got her in an interrogation room right now. She's not talking." "Then we make her talk." "That's not how this works, Webb. We can't just—" "Yes, we can." Marcus started walking toward Lawson's vehicle, ignoring the pain in his leg that had gone from manageable to excruciating. We've got about 2 hours before every cell in that network goes dark and vanishes. If we don't move now, this was all for nothing. Amira caught up to him. What are you planning? Something stupid. He got in the passenger seat, waiting for the others to follow. But it's the only play we've got left. The FBI field office on 4th Street looked different in daylight. Less fortress, more administrative building that happened to have armed guards and bulletproof glass. Marcus walked through the front entrance with Briggs beside him, credentials clearing them past security, and they took the elevator down to the interrogation level, where Rebecca Lorne had been sitting in a windowless room for the past 6 hours. Harding met them outside the observation window, arms crossed, looking like he'd been up for 3 days straight. She lawyered up 2 hours ago. We can't touch her until the attorney arrives. How long? Briggs asked. Could be 10 minutes, could be 10 hours. He's coming from New York. Through the one-way glass, Marcus could see Lorne sitting at a metal table, hands folded, staring at nothing. She looked tired, but not broken, like someone who'd made peace with whatever consequences were coming. I need 5 minutes with her, Marcus said. Harding shook his head. Not happening. Chain of custody, legal protocols, you go in there without counsel present, and anything she says gets thrown out. I don't need a confession. I just need her to know something. What? Marcus didn't answer. He opened the door and walked in. Lorne looked up, and for a second genuine surprise crossed her face. Then it smoothed back into neutral. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone without my lawyer. I'm not here to interrogate you. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her, keeping his hands visible on the table. I'm here to tell you about Fort McNair. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. West Wing collapsed, Marcus continued. Parking garage bomb, probably set by one of the cells you helped get into the country. We don't have a final casualty count yet, but early estimates put it around 60 dead, maybe more. Most of them civilians. Military families, kids. I didn't... Yeah, you did. Marcus leaned forward. You processed their visas. You vouched for them. You gave them access to a system that trusted you, and they used it to kill people. So whatever deal you think your lawyer's going to cut, whatever you think you can walk away from, I want you to understand something. You're not walking away. You're going down for every single person who died today, and the families of those people are going to make sure everyone knows your name. You're going to be famous, Rebecca, just not the way you thought. Her jaw tightened. I want my lawyer. Sure, but before he gets here, you should know we've already identified the 3 primary handlers coordinating the network. We've got surveillance on 2 of them right now, and the third, Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a photo that Briggs had sent him, is in FBI custody as of 20 minutes ago. So whatever protection you thought you had, it's gone. They're rolling on you right now, telling us everything, trying to save themselves. And when the dust settles, you're going to be the only one left holding the bag. That got through. Her composure cracked just enough to show the fear underneath. You're lying. Am I? Marcus stood. Guess you'll find out when your lawyer gets here and explains how screwed you really are. He left her sitting there and walked back into the observation room, where Harding was staring at him like he'd just committed a felony. You just contaminated a federal witness. I gave her information, Marcus said, and now she's going to think about it. Briggs's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then hung up with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. We got one of the handlers. FBI picked him up in Falls Church based on intel from the USB drive. He's already cooperating. What about the other 2? Harding asked. Still working on it, but this guy's giving us actionable intelligence on the network structure, the funding sources, everything. It's a full unravel. Through the glass, Marcus watched Rebecca Lorne put her head in her hands. She wasn't crying, but she looked like someone who just realized the walls were closing in and there was no way out. Harding's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, then came back looking grim. Her lawyer just arrived. Interview's over. But it didn't matter. The cracks were already showing. Over the next 18 hours, the network collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. The handler in FBI custody gave up the locations of 3 cells, which led to raids that netted 14 more suspects. 2 of them flipped immediately, providing enough evidence to identify the remaining handlers and trace the money back to offshore accounts that connected all the way to remnants of the Hawk Collective still operating in the Middle East. Marcus watched it happen from a conference room in the Pentagon, where Briggs had set up a command center coordinating with every agency involved. Screens on the wall showed live feeds from raid sites, maps tracking known associates, and a growing chart that linked suspects together in a web so complex it looked like someone had thrown spaghetti at a wall and called it intelligence. Amira sat beside him, reviewing medical records from the Fort McNair attack and cross-referencing them with injury patterns she'd documented from previous incidents. She'd been working for 36 hours straight, running on coffee and stubbornness, and Marcus knew she was about 10 minutes from collapsing, but she wouldn't stop until every piece was accounted for. Final count from McNair is 42 dead, Briggs said quietly, ending a call. Could have been worse. The evacuation saved lives. Could have been better if we'd found the real device, Marcus said. You disabled a chemical weapon that would have killed everyone in the building. That's not nothing. It didn't feel like enough. 42 people were still dead, and somewhere out there the architects of this whole operation were still breathing. Amira looked up from her laptop. The handler they arrested in Falls Church. Has he given up the primary coordinator yet? Working on it. He claims he doesn't know who runs the overall operation, that everything was compartmentalized. He's lying, she said flatly. Nobody sets up a network this sophisticated without centralized control. There's someone at the top making decisions, and they're still out there. Briggs didn't argue. He just pulled up another screen showing the financial trail. Money's coming from a shell company registered in the Caymans, but the ownership structure is buried under so many layers we can't trace it back to an individual. Best guess is someone with significant resources and connections to both the Hawk Collective and domestic extremist groups. Someone inside the system, Marcus said. Maybe. Or someone who used to be. The pieces were there, scattered across a dozen different databases and classified files, but they weren't connecting yet. Marcus stared at the screens until his vision blurred, trying to see the pattern Amira had spent 2 years documenting, trying to find the thread that would unravel the whole thing. Then his phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. You want answers? Ask about Operation Sandstone. He showed it to Briggs, who went very still. Where'd you get this? Just came through. You know what Sandstone is? Briggs stood abruptly, walking to a secure terminal and typing in a series of commands that brought up classified files Marcus didn't have clearance to see. The colonel's face went from tense to furious as he read. Operation Sandstone was a joint CIA-DOD intelligence initiative in Afghanistan, 2019 to 2021. The goal was to identify and turn high-value enemy assets, basically recruiting people inside insurgent networks to feed us information in exchange for protection and eventual extraction to the U.S. Let me guess, Amira said. It got compromised. Worse, it got weaponized. Briggs pulled up a document that was so heavily redacted it looked like someone had painted it black. Someone inside the operation started using it to funnel money and resources to the very networks we were supposed to be dismantling. By the time anyone realized what was happening, we had assets in country who were playing both sides, and when the withdrawal happened, they all disappeared into the chaos. Who ran Sandstone? Marcus asked, but he already knew the answer was going to be bad. Briggs pulled up a personnel file. The photo showed a woman in her 50s, Army colonel, career intelligence officer with commendations that read like a highlight reel. Her name was Victoria Cross, and according to the file, she'd retired 6 months ago and taken a consulting position with a private defense contractor based in Northern Virginia. She'd have access, Amira said quietly, to intelligence networks, military installations, personnel files, everything needed to coordinate this. And she'd also have motive, Briggs added. Sandstone got shut down after an inspector general investigation found financial irregularities. Cross was never formally charged, but her career was effectively over. She retired under pressure and lost her pension. Marcus looked at the screens showing the ongoing raids, the suspects being hauled into custody, the network being systematically dismantled. She's watching this happen right now, watching everything she built get torn apart. Which makes her dangerous, Briggs said, cornered and with nothing left to lose. His phone rang. He answered, listened, then grabbed his jacket. Cross just showed up at Fort Belvoir. She's asking to speak with the commanding officer, says she has information about the attacks. It's a trap, Marcus said. Probably, but we can't ignore it. Briggs headed for the door. You two stay here. This is federal jurisdiction now, and you've done enough. Marcus waited until Briggs was gone, then looked at Amira. You thinking what I'm thinking? That we're absolutely not staying here while the person responsible for everything walks into a military installation with access to weapons and personnel? Yeah. They grabbed their gear and followed. Fort Belvoir sprawled across 8,000 acres of northern Virginia, home to multiple commands and enough classified facilities to make any intelligence officer salivate. Marcus and Amira arrived 20 minutes after Briggs, using credentials that probably shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, and found the colonel in a command center watching live video feed from the building where Cross was currently sitting in a conference room. "I told you to stay put," Briggs said without looking away from the screen. "And I'm terrible at following orders." Marcus studied the feed. Cross sat alone, hands folded on the table, looking calm and composed like she was attending a business meeting instead of potentially facing life in prison. "What's she saying?" "That she wants immunity in exchange for information on the network's funding sources and remaining cells. Says she can deliver the entire operation if we agree to terms." "She's stalling," Amira said. "Buying time for something." "What?" Before anyone could answer, alarms started blaring throughout the base. Red lights flashed, and automated voices began ordering immediate lockdown procedures. Briggs grabbed a phone, barking questions at whoever was on the other end, and his face went white. "We've got a breach at the armory. Someone's inside accessing restricted weapons." Marcus felt ice flood his veins. "How far from where Cross is?" 200 yards. It wasn't a rescue. It was a distraction. Cross had walked in knowing exactly what would happen, knowing security would focus on her while someone else hit the real target, and now they had access to military-grade hardware with the entire base locked down. "We need to evacuate," Briggs started, but the screens went dark. All of them, simultaneously, like someone had cut power to the entire surveillance system. Then the lights went out. Emergency backup generators kicked in after 3 seconds that felt like hours, bathing everything in red emergency lighting. Marcus's hand went to his weapon, still there, still loaded, and he positioned himself between Amira and the door. "Get her out of here," he told Briggs. "Where are you going?" "To stop whatever Cross has planned." He didn't wait for permission. He went out into a hallway filled with running personnel and blaring alarms, following the sound of gunfire that had just erupted from the direction of the armory. 2 soldiers ran past him heading the opposite direction, and he grabbed one. "What's happening?" "Active shooter, armory level, 3 hostiles, armed with—" The explosion cut him off, a blast that rocked the entire building and sent everyone to the floor. Marcus's ears rang, his vision swam, but he forced himself up and kept moving toward the source of the chaos. He found Cross in a stairwell, holding a detonator and a pistol, blocking the route down to the armory. When she saw him, she smiled. "Sergeant Webb." "Right on time." "It's over, Colonel. Your network's burned, your handlers are in custody, and there's nowhere left to run." "You're right, it is over." She gestured with the detonator. "That's why I'm taking as many of you with me as I can. There are innocent people in this building. There are no innocent people here." Her voice went hard, all pretense of civility dropping away. "Just soldiers who followed orders, bureaucrats who covered up failures, and a system that sacrifices people like pawns and calls it strategy. I gave them 20 years. I ran operations that saved lives, stopped threats, kept this country safe. And when Sandstone failed because some politician needed a scapegoat, they threw me away like I never mattered." "So you decided to kill them," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, buying time for the tactical team he could hear converging on their location. "I decided to show them what happens when you betray the people keeping you alive." Cross's finger moved closer to the detonator trigger. "The bombs in the armory are linked to charges throughout the building. When I press this, the whole place comes down. 300 casualties, maybe more. And everyone will know it happened because your precious system failed." "You'll die too." "I know." She looked almost peaceful about it. "But I'll die knowing I made them pay." Marcus saw movement behind her. Briggs, coming up the stairs from below, weapon drawn but no clear shot. Cross's back was to him, but one wrong move and she'd pressed the trigger out of reflex. "You were a good officer," Marcus said, pulling her attention back. "Decorated, respected. People looked up to you. And then they tossed me aside. Because you turned. Because you started working with the same people who killed our guys. You think that's justice? That's just revenge dressed up in patriotism. Don't lecture me about patriotism. Spit flew from her mouth, and Marcus saw the madness finally showing through. I bled for this country. I lost people I loved in operations nobody will ever hear about. And my reward was being investigated, humiliated, and forced out with nothing. So yes, this is revenge, and it's going to feel really good. Briggs fired. The shot hit Cross in the shoulder, spinning her around, and the detonator flew from her hand. Marcus dove for it, sliding across tile slick with someone's spilled coffee, and his fingers closed around the device just as Cross brought her pistol up. Briggs fired again. This time he didn't miss. Cross went down hard, blood pooling beneath her, and the pistol clattered away. Marcus looked at the detonator in his hand, a crude device, wires visible through cracked plastic, the trigger mechanism still armed. Don't move, Briggs said, weapon still trained on Cross, even though she was clearly not getting up. EOD's on the way. Marcus carefully, very carefully, set the detonator on the floor and stepped back. His hands were shaking so bad he had to clench them into fists to make it stop. Cross was still breathing, but barely. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that had already gone distant. You didn't win, she whispered. There are others. Always others. Then she stopped breathing altogether. The bomb disposal team arrived 3 minutes later and spent the next hour methodically disarming devices Cross had planted throughout the armory and adjacent buildings. Final count. 7 separate charges, all linked to the detonator Marcus had caught. Enough explosive power to level a city block. If Cross had succeeded, if she'd pressed that trigger, the casualties would have dwarfed everything that came before. But she hadn't, and the network she'd spent 3 years building was gone, dismantled piece by piece by the very evidence she'd tried to destroy. The remaining cells were being rolled up across the country, assets were being frozen, and the people she'd recruited were learning what happened when you bet everything on someone else's revenge. Marcus found Amira in the medical bay, treating injured personnel with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of practice. She looked up when he walked in, and something in her expression eased when she saw he was intact. It's done, he said. I heard. She finished bandaging a soldier's arm and moved to the next patient. Cross? Dead. Tried to blow up half the base, but we stopped her. Amira nodded, not looking surprised. There'll be more, you know. People like her don't operate in a vacuum. She had support, resources, connections we probably haven't found yet. Then we keep looking. She finally stopped working and turned to face him fully. We? Yeah. Marcus leaned against a supply cabinet, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. Briggs offered me a position with DoD counterintelligence. Contract work, civilian consultant, whatever keeps me out of the regular chain of command. He wants someone who understands how these networks operate, someone who won't back down when things get complicated. And you said yes. I said I'd think about it. He paused. He asked about you too. Said you've got skills the intelligence community could use. Medical expertise, pattern recognition, the ability to see connections other people miss. Amira laughed, but it was hollow. I'm a fugitive with a fake identity and a history of collaborating with enemy combatants. Not exactly prime recruitment material. Colonel Briggs sees it differently. He's already working on getting your record cleared, reinstating your commission under your real name. It won't be fast and it won't be easy, but he thinks he can make it happen. She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, what about you? What do you see when you look at me? Marcus thought about the woman who'd been treating him in that Baltimore ER when this started. The doctor who'd disappeared into a war zone and come back as someone else. The person who'd spent 2 years documenting threats nobody else believed in because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. I see someone who saved my life, he said. Twice, if you count the chemical device at McNair. I see someone who did what she had to do to survive and kept fighting even when nobody was watching. And I see someone who deserves a second chance. Her eyes were bright, but she blinked it away before the tears could fall. You barely know me, Marcus. The real me. Everything you think you know is 3 years old and filtered through combat stress. So let me get to know you now. The person you are, not the ghost you used to be. He straightened, wincing as his leg reminded him it still needed actual medical attention. Work with us. Help us finish what you started. And maybe, when this is all over, we can figure out who we're supposed to be instead of who we were. She looked at him for a long time, weighing options he couldn't see, fighting battles that had nothing to do with bombs or networks or revenge. Then she nodded once. Decision made. Okay. The media called it the largest counterterrorism operation in a decade. 47 suspects arrested, 3 primary handlers in custody, financial networks dismantled across 6 countries. The news ran wall-to-wall coverage for a week, interviewing experts and politicians who all had opinions about how it happened and what should have been done differently. Nobody mentioned Amira Hassan by name. Her involvement stayed classified, buried in reports that would remain sealed for the next 75 years. As far as the public knew, she didn't exist, which was exactly how she wanted it. Marcus watched the news from a hospital bed at Walter Reed, where doctors had finally forced him to deal with the infection that had been festering in his leg since the bar fight that started everything. They'd pumped him full of antibiotics, re-stitched the wound properly, and told him he was lucky he hadn't lost the whole leg to sepsis. He didn't feel lucky. He felt tired. Briggs visited on the 3rd day, bringing coffee that was somehow worse than hospital cafeteria coffee and a folder full of paperwork that made Marcus's head hurt just looking at it. Contract offer, Briggs said, dropping the folder on the bed. Full benefits, competitive salary, and enough operational latitude to keep you from getting bored. Start dates flexible pending medical clearance. What about Amira? She's in. Briggs settled into the visitor chair like he planned to stay a while. State Department agreed to clear her record in exchange for testimony about the Hack Collective and her time in captivity. She'll never get her military commission back, too much political baggage, but we can bring her in as a civilian analyst specializing in medical intelligence and threat assessment. She agree to that? She's thinking about it. Briggs paused. She asked about you, actually. Wanted to know if you were serious about the second chance thing, or if it was just something you said in the moment. Marcus looked at the contract in front of him, at the life he could choose if he signed, and thought about all the roads that had led here. The bar fight, the ER, the woman who shouldn't exist but did, the network that had killed 68 people and could have killed hundreds more if not for someone who'd spent 2 years fighting a war nobody knew about. Tell her I'm serious, he said, and signed the papers. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in a secure facility in Northern Virginia, watching through one-way glass as Amira gave testimony to a joint Senate committee about Operation Sandstone, the Hack Collective, and the intelligence failures that had allowed Victoria Cross to operate unchecked for years. She spoke clearly, precisely, answering every question without flinching, and Marcus saw the senators' expressions change as they realized they were dealing with someone who knew more about the threat than all their briefings combined. When she was done, when the committee had exhausted their questions and adjourned for closed session, she walked out and found Marcus waiting in the hallway. How'd I do? You terrified them. It was perfect. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. Good. They should be terrified. This isn't over, Marcus. Cross was just one node in a much bigger network, and the people funding her are still out there. Then we find them. We? Yeah. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the exit. Briggs has us assigned to the same task force. Apparently we work well together. We almost got killed 6 times. That's what I mean. They emerged into daylight, into a fall afternoon that smelled like rain and distant wood smoke. Somewhere in the city, normal people were living normal lives, unaware of the threats being tracked and dismantled by people they'd never meet. That was fine. That was the job. Amira's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. What is it? Message from an unknown number. She showed him the screen. Dr. Hassan. We know you survived. We know where you work. And we know you took something that belongs to us. Return it, or the next attack makes Fort McNair look like a warning. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly, all the pieces he thought were settled suddenly unstable again. When did this come through? Just now. He pulled out his own phone, checking for messages. Nothing. But that didn't mean anything. If they knew about Amira, they knew about him too. We need to tell Briggs, he said. And say what? That someone out there is still watching us? He'll lock us down, put us in protective custody, and whoever sent this will just wait until we're vulnerable again. So what do you want to do? Amira looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. I want to find them before they find us. You in? Marcus thought about the safe play. Report the threat, follow protocol, trust the system to protect them. Then he thought about where that had gotten them so far. "Yeah," he said. "I'm in." They walked to Marcus's car, got in, and drove away from the federal building that was supposed to keep them safe. Behind them, in the shadows they couldn't see, someone was watching, waiting, planning the next move in a game that had never really ended. And somewhere deep in classified servers, buried in files that shouldn't exist, a single word appeared next to their names: compromised. The word compromised blinked twice on the screen deep in a server farm outside Langley, then disappeared into encrypted archives that only 3 people had clearance to access. One of them was already dead. The second was sitting in a federal prison awaiting trial. And the third was currently driving a rental sedan through Arlington, watching Marcus and Amira's car from 4 vehicles back, close enough to track but far enough to stay invisible. His name was David Kessler, former NSA analyst, current ghost. He'd built the surveillance architecture that allowed Operation Sandstone to function, and when it collapsed, he'd done what any smart rat does when the ship starts sinking. He'd grabbed what he could carry and disappeared into the infrastructure he'd helped create. For 3 years, he'd been watching from inside the system, moving money, coordinating cells, and making sure Victoria Cross never got close enough to expose him. Cross's death had been inconvenient, but manageable. She'd kept her mouth shut right up until the end, and the people she'd recruited didn't know enough to connect the dots back to him. But Dr. Hassan was different. She'd spent 2 years building a case that got dangerously close to the truth, and now she was working directly with DoD counterintelligence, which meant she'd eventually find the one thread that would unravel everything. So Kessler had sent the message. Not as a threat, though it certainly sounded like one, but as bait. Because people like Hassan and Webb were predictable. They didn't run from threats. They ran toward them. And when they did, they'd walk straight into the trap he'd spent the last 6 hours setting up. Marcus drove in silence, checking his mirrors every 30 seconds, watching for tails they both knew were probably there. Amira sat in the passenger seat with her laptop open, running traces on the message's origin point, trying to find something actionable in digital breadcrumbs that had been carefully laid to lead exactly where the sender wanted them to go. It came through a VPN routing system that bounces across 17 countries, she said finally. By the time I track it back to the source, the trail will be cold. So we're going in blind. We're always going in blind. She closed the laptop. Question is whether we're smart enough to see the trap before we step in it. Marcus's phone rang. Briggs. Tell me you didn't just drive away from federal protection after receiving a direct threat, the colonel said without preamble. I can't tell you that. Damn it, Webb. Get back here, now! Can't do that either. Marcus merged onto I-95, heading south toward the coordinates Amira had pulled from the message's metadata. Whoever sent this knows where we work, where we live, probably what we had for breakfast. Sitting in a federal building just makes us easier targets. So does going after them alone. We're not alone. We've got each other. Briggs was silent for a moment. The system worked, Marcus. We dismantled the network, we stopped the attacks. Let us handle the cleanup. The system worked because Amira spent 2 years doing the job the system should have done in the first place, and now someone wants her dead for it. So yeah, we're going after them. You can either help or get out of the way. Another pause. Then, I'm tracking your phone. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm sending a tactical team to extract you. Fair enough. Marcus hung up and caught Amira looking at him with something that might have been respect or might have been exasperation, hard to tell. 2 hours, she said. That's not a lot of time to find someone who's been hiding inside government surveillance networks for years. Then we'd better move fast. The coordinates led to an abandoned office park in Fairfax, the kind of place that had been struggling even before the pandemic and was now just empty glass and concrete waiting for someone to buy the land and start over. Marcus parked 2 blocks away, and they approached on foot, weapons drawn, moving through late afternoon shadows that stretched long across cracked pavement. The building's main entrance was unlocked. Another red flag added to a growing pile. Inside smelled like mold and stale air. Office furniture sat where it had been left, computers still on desks, papers scattered like everyone had just walked out one day and never come back. Marcus moved through the lobby with Amira behind him, covering angles, checking doors, looking for the ambush that had to be coming. They found it on the 3rd floor. Not an ambush. A conference room with a laptop sitting open on the table, screen showing a video feed of the very hallway they were standing in. Someone had been watching them since they entered the building. It's a trap, Amira said quietly. Yeah. Marcus approached the laptop slowly, checking for tripwires or pressure sensors. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean much. Question is what kind? The screen changed. The video feed disappeared, replaced by a text message that appeared one letter at a time, like someone was typing in real time. Did you really think it would be that easy? Marcus looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the room. Whoever was on the other end could see them right now. Another message. Dr. Hassan, I have something you want. Check the drawer. Amira crossed to the desk and pulled open the top drawer. Inside was a file folder, old and worn, marked with a classification stamp that had expired years ago. She opened it and Marcus saw her face go pale. What is it? Medical records from Kandahar. Her hands shook as she turned pages. These are the files I kept on everyone I treated while I was being held. Patients, injuries, everything. I thought they were destroyed in the airstrike. Who would have access to those? Only someone inside the intelligence community. Someone who was running surveillance on the Hawk collective network while I was there. She looked up at the camera. Someone who was watching the whole time and did nothing to help. The laptop screen changed again. I couldn't help you then, but I can help you now if you're willing to make a deal. What kind of deal? Marcus asked the empty room. You walk away, both of you. Forget about the network. Forget about the threats. Forget about everything you think you know. In exchange, I'll make sure Dr. Hassan's real identity stays buried. No courts-martial, no investigations, no consequences. You get to keep your new lives. And if we refuse, Amira said, then I release everything. The records showing you treated enemy combatants. The financial transactions that could be interpreted as you accepting payment for your services. The testimony from Hawk fighters, willing to say you worked for them willingly. Your career ends. Your life ends. And everyone who died looking for you died for nothing. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp. You're blackmailing us with evidence you fabricated. I'm offering you a choice. Take it or leave it. You have 60 seconds. Amira set the file down carefully, like it might explode if handled wrong. Her face had gone from pale to something harder. Who are you? Someone who survived when smarter people didn't. Someone who knows the system is broken and stopped pretending it could be fixed. Someone who's giving you a way out before this gets worse. Show yourself, Marcus said. You want to make a deal? Do it face to face like you've got some spine. The screen went dark. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then they heard footsteps coming from the hallway, slow and measured, and a man appeared in the doorway, mid-40s, average height, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he'd just come from a casual Friday at the office. He looked completely unremarkable, the kind of person you'd pass on the street and forget immediately. Except his eyes. Those were sharp and calculating and completely empty of anything resembling remorse. David Kessler, he said, not offering a hand. Former NSA, current freelancer. And the person who's been keeping this whole operation running since Victoria Cross decided to go scorched earth. Marcus raised his weapon. On your knees, now. Kessler didn't move. You shoot me. You never find out where the rest of the network is. You never learn which federal agents are on my payroll. You never discover how deep the compromise goes. But sure, pull the trigger if it makes you feel better. Marcus, Amira said quietly. A warning, or maybe just acknowledgement that Kessler was right. I'm not here to hurt you, Kessler continued. I'm here to offer you a way out of a situation that ends badly for everyone if we keep escalating. You think dismantling Cross's network was the end? It was barely the beginning. There are people at levels you can't reach who've been protecting this operation because it serves their interests. You go after them, they'll bury you so deep nobody will ever find the bodies. Then we'll take our chances, Marcus said. Kessler sighed. You're not hearing me. I control surveillance on half the intelligence community's black operations. I have access to communications, financial records, operational plans that would make Snowden's leaks look like a parking ticket. You want to fight me? You're fighting the entire apparatus of the security state. Sounds like you're scared, Amira said. That got a reaction. Kessler's jaw tightened. I'm practical. I know when to cut losses and move on. Cross didn't, and look where that got her. She's dead because she chose revenge over everything else, Marcus said. You're choosing survival over accountability. Not sure that's better. It is if you want to keep breathing. Kessler pulled out his phone, tapping something on the screen. I just sent you a file. Encrypted communications between 4 senators, 2 Pentagon officials, and a deputy director at CIA. They've all been receiving payments from the same offshore accounts that funded the Hawk network. You release that. You don't just blow up my operation, you blow up theirs too, and they will kill you to keep it quiet. Marcus's phone buzzed. He didn't look at it. Here's what's going to happen, Kessler said. You're going to take that file and walk away. You're going to tell Briggs the threat was a dead end, that you found nothing actionable, and in 6 months, maybe a year, I'll make sure certain evidence surfaces that clears Dr. Hassan's name completely. Military commendation, recognition for her service, the whole redemption arc. Everyone wins. Except the people who died, Amira said. They're already dead. Nothing changes that. Kessler's voice went flat. But you're still alive. And you can stay that way if you're smart. Marcus looked at Amira. She looked back, and in that moment of silent communication, they both knew what the answer was. No, Marcus said. Kessler blinked. Excuse me? No deal. We're taking you in and we're burning down everyone connected to this. Senators, officials, whoever, all of them. You're signing your death warrant. Maybe, but at least we'll die knowing we didn't fold when someone threatened us. Marcus stepped forward, weapon still trained on Kessler's chest. On your knees. Last time I'm asking. Kessler smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You should have taken the deal. He raised his phone and pressed something on the screen. The explosion came from outside, a sharp crack followed by the scream of tearing metal. Marcus spun toward the window in time to see his car, parked 2 blocks away, erupt in flames. The shockwave rattled the building's glass, and somewhere below them an alarm started wailing. I knew you'd refuse, Kessler said calmly, so I took precautions. Your vehicle's gone. Briggs's tactical team won't arrive for another 90 minutes. And I've got 3 contractors on the ground floor who are very good at making problems disappear. He pocketed his phone. Last chance. Walk away, or I make sure you don't walk at all. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. 1 shot, center mass, and this would be over. But Kessler was right about one thing. They needed him alive to expose the network. Dead men couldn't testify. Amira, he said quietly, get behind me. She moved, but not the way he expected. Instead of retreating, she stepped forward, pulling something from her jacket pocket, a small recording device, the kind journalists used for interviews. I've been recording since we entered this room, she said, showing Kessler the screen. Everything you just said about the senators, the Pentagon officials, the offshore accounts. All of it. Kessler's smile vanished. That won't hold up in court. Doesn't have to. I'm not sending it to court. She pulled out her phone with her other hand, typing something fast. I'm sending it to every major news outlet in the country. Right now. Don't. Too late. She hit send, and Marcus heard the whoosh of messages being delivered. By the time your contractors get up here, this will be on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, everywhere. Your entire network just went public. For the first time, Kessler looked genuinely rattled. You have no idea what you just did. I know exactly what I did, Amira said. I made sure you cannot hide anymore. None of you can. Kessler's hand moved toward his jacket, and Marcus fired. The shot hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and the pistol he'd been reaching for clattered to the floor. He went down hard, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. That's for everyone who died while you were watching, Marcus said. They secured Kessler with zip ties Amira found in the desk drawer, and Marcus called Briggs while she applied pressure to the wound to keep him from bleeding out before he could face trial. We've got him, Marcus said when Briggs answered, and we've got evidence. Lots of it. Where are you? Fairfax Office Park, Building 3. But you might want to hurry. We've got incoming hostiles and our ride just exploded. On my way. And Webb, good work. The contractors hit the 3rd floor 6 minutes later, 3 men with tactical gear and no identification, moving through the building like they'd done this 100 times before. Marcus and Amira had barricaded themselves in the conference room, using desks and filing cabinets to create a defensive position that wouldn't stop bullets but might buy them a few extra seconds. The first contractor through the door took a round from Marcus's Glock and went down. The second got smart and pulled back, laying down suppressive fire that chewed through the barricade and forced them to the floor. Glass exploded above their heads, raining down in fragments that cut like razors. "We need to move!" Amira shouted over the gunfire. Marcus grabbed Kessler, still conscious, still bleeding, and dragged him toward the emergency exit at the back of the room. Amira covered them, firing twice to keep the contractors pinned, then followed as they crashed through the door into a stairwell that echoed with the sound of running footsteps coming from below. More contractors. They were surrounded. "Up," Marcus said, and they climbed, hauling Kessler between them, his weight making every step a struggle. The contractors below opened fire, rounds sparking off metal railings, and Marcus returned fireblind, just trying to buy time. They made it to the roof as helicopters appeared on the horizon, FBI markings finally, coming in fast. Marcus dragged Kessler to the center of the rooftop and fired 3 shots into the air, signaling their position, while Amira covered the stairwell door. The contractors burst through, and she dropped the first one with a shot that would have made any instructor proud. The second took cover behind a ventilation unit, and then the world exploded with sound as the FBI helicopters opened up with mounted guns, tearing into the rooftop and forcing everyone down. "Federal agents!" A voice boomed from the lead helicopter's loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground." The surviving contractor threw his rifle away and complied. Marcus and Amira did the same, hands visible, and within 60 seconds, the rooftop was swarming with agents wearing tactical gear and very serious expressions. Briggs arrived in the third helicopter, touching down just long enough to confirm they were intact before airlifting all of them, Marcus, Amira, Kessler, and the captured contractors, back to a secure facility for debriefing. The interrogation lasted 14 hours. Marcus gave his statement 4 times to 4 different agencies, each one asking the same questions in slightly different ways, trying to find inconsistencies that didn't exist because he was telling the truth. Amira went through the same process in an adjacent room, and somewhere else Kessler was being worked over by interrogators who specialized in breaking people who thought they were too smart to break. When it was finally over, when Marcus had signed so many forms, his hand cramped and been cleared by so many medical evaluations he'd lost count, Briggs found him in a break room nursing terrible coffee and staring at a television showing news coverage of what the media was calling the largest intelligence scandal since Watergate. "You made the news," Briggs said, sitting down across from him. "Yeah, not how I wanted to get famous." Amira's recording did exactly what she said it would. The senators are already resigning. The Pentagon officials are being investigated. CIA's in full damage control. And Kessler's giving up everyone he knows in exchange for a lighter sentence. How light? Still life in federal prison, but he won't get the death penalty. Briggs leaned back. "You did good, Marcus, both of you. This could have gone a lot worse. 68 people are dead. That's pretty bad. Could have been 600 or 6,000. You stopped it before it got that far." Briggs pulled out a folder, setting it on the table. "I've got something for you, both of you actually." Marcus opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents, official commendations from the Department of Defense, signed by the Secretary himself, recognizing their actions in disrupting a domestic terror network and preventing further loss of life. The second document was even better. "Full reinstatement," Briggs said. "Dr. Amira Hassan, Major, Medical Corps. Retroactive to her date of capture. All charges dropped, record cleared, back pay issued. She's officially alive again." Marcus felt something tight in his chest ease for the first time in weeks. "She know yet?" "I'm telling her next, but I wanted you to see it first." Briggs stood. "You two make a good team. I'd like to keep you together if you're interested. Task force targeting domestic and international terror networks with intelligence community connections. Full operational authority, minimal oversight, and the resources to actually get things done." "What's the catch?" "The catch is you'll be going after people who don't want to be found, and when you find them, they'll do everything in their power to kill you before you can expose them. It's dangerous work with a low life expectancy and almost no recognition." "Sounds perfect," Marcus said. Briggs smiled. "Thought you'd say that. Report Monday 0800 and get some sleep. You look like hell." Marcus found Amira in another break room, staring at her own copy of the reinstatement order like she couldn't quite believe it was real. When she saw him, she stood, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd started as strangers and ended up saving each other's lives more times than either could count. "They cleared me," she said quietly. "I heard. Congratulations, Major." "Don't. I haven't been a major in 3 years. I don't know if I remember how." "You'll figure it out." Marcus sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. "Briggs offered us positions, task force work, hunting the people who slipped through the cracks. And you said yes." "I said I'd think about it. Wanted to talk to you first." Amira set down the reinstatement order. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd spent the rest of my days hiding, looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to recognize me and drag everything back into the light. And then you walked into that ER and did exactly that. "Sorry," Marcus said, though he wasn't. "Don't be. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever get back, a chance to be who I really am instead of who I had to become." She met his eyes. "So yeah, I'm in. Whatever Briggs wants us to do, whatever threats we're going after, I'm in. Because for the first time in 3 years, I don't have to hide anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of that settle. Then Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Vance, his buddy from the bar fight that had started everything. "Saw you on the news. You're famous, man. Drinks on me when you're back in town." Marcus showed it to Amira, and she laughed, really laughed. The kind that came from relief and exhaustion and the simple joy of being alive when everything had tried to kill you. "We should take him up on that," she said. "Yeah, but maybe avoid the bar fights this time." "Where's the fun in that?" The formal recognition ceremony happened 2 weeks later in a Pentagon briefing room that was carefully kept away from media cameras. The Secretary of Defense personally presented the commendations, shook their hands, and said things about service and sacrifice that were probably meaningful but felt distant when Marcus was still processing everything that had happened. What mattered more was what came after. Rollins's widow, Diane, a quiet woman with kind eyes who'd raised their daughter alone for the past 3 years, approached Amira during the reception. "I wanted to thank you," Diane said quietly. Amira looked confused. "For what?" "For surviving. For coming back. My husband spent 6 months looking for you, and I used to be angry about that. Angry that he died searching for someone who might already be dead. But now I understand you were worth finding. You were worth the search. And knowing that he didn't die for nothing," her voice cracked. "That means something." Amira's eyes were bright, but she kept her composure. "Your husband was a good man. I'm sorry I never got to thank him." "You just did." Diane squeezed her hand once, then moved away, leaving Amira standing there with tears finally spilling over. Marcus found her outside afterward, sitting on a bench overlooking the Potomac, watching the sun set over water that looked like molten gold. "You okay?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I spent 3 years thinking I didn't deserve to be alive, that I should have died in that airstrike, or stayed dead when I had the chance. And now people are calling me a hero, and I don't know what to do with that." Marcus sat beside her. "You know what Rollins used to say? That being a hero wasn't about doing big dramatic things. It was about making the hard choices when nobody was watching and living with the consequences. You did that. For 3 years you did that. And yeah, you survived when you probably shouldn't have. But you also saved lives, mine included. That counts for something. Does it make up for the ones I couldn't save?" "Nothing makes up for that. But it's a start." They sat in silence as the sun dropped below the horizon and the city lights began to flicker on, thousands of small points of light pushing back against the darkness. Somewhere in that city, people were living their lives, unaware of the threats that had been stopped, the disasters that had been prevented, the quiet war being fought by people who'd never get their names in history books. That was fine. That was the job. Amira stood, brushing off her uniform, still new enough that it didn't quite feel like hers yet. "Briggs wants us in Monday. We should probably figure out what we're walking into." "I already know what we're walking into. More threats, more networks, more people who think they're untouchable until we prove otherwise." Sounds exhausting. Sounds like exactly what we're good at. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Yeah, it does." They walked back toward the Pentagon together, two people who'd been broken by the same war in different ways and somehow found a way to put the pieces back together. Not perfectly. There were still cracks, still scars, still nights when the memories came back hard enough to steal sleep. But they were whole enough to keep fighting, and that was more than either of them had 3 weeks ago. Behind them, the Potomac kept flowing, indifferent to human drama, carrying the weight of history toward the ocean. And somewhere in the night, new threats were already forming, new networks plotting, new people making the calculations that would lead them down paths they couldn't come back from. But for tonight, for this moment, Marcus and Amira could rest knowing they'd done what needed doing. They'd stopped the attacks. They'd exposed corruption. They'd brought down people who thought themselves beyond accountability. And they'd proven that the system, flawed and broken as it was, could still work if the right people were willing to fight for it. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day that promised winter was coming but hadn't quite committed yet. Marcus and Amira reported to a nondescript building in Arlington that didn't appear on any official maps, going through security checkpoints that verified everything from retinal scans to classified clearances before allowing them into a basement-level operations center. Briggs met them at the entrance, looking significantly less exhausted than the last time they'd seen him. "Welcome to Task Force Sentinel. Your first briefing starts in 10 minutes. Coffee's in the break room, and don't touch anything marked red. That's above your pay grade." "What exactly is our pay grade, Bocus?" Marcus asked. "High enough to know better, low enough to still have deniability." Briggs led them through a maze of corridors to a conference room where a dozen other people were already gathering. Analysts, field operatives, technical specialists, all of them wearing the same expression of focused intensity. The briefing covered 3 active investigations into networks operating across the country, each one connected to foreign intelligence services or domestic extremist groups that had learned how to exploit gaps in the system. The targets were sophisticated, well-funded, and very good at staying hidden, which was exactly why Task Force Sentinel existed. When the briefing ended, Briggs assigned Marcus and Amira to the team investigating a financial network funneling money to militia groups in the Pacific Northwest. Their first deployment was in 72 hours. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked as they reviewed mission files in their shared office, a cramped space with 2 desks, 3 computer monitors, and a coffee maker that looked like it predated the Cold War. Amira pulled up satellite imagery of their target area, studying the terrain with the same focus she'd brought to tracking the Hawk Collective. "I've been ready for 3 years. Just didn't know it until now. And after this mission, after we take down this network, there'll be another one, and another one after that. Threats don't stop because we're tired." She looked at him, and there was steel in her expression that hadn't been there when they first met. "But neither do we. That's the job." "That's the job," Marcus agreed. They worked through the night, building profiles and mapping connections, and when the sun rose on their first official day as Task Force Sentinel operatives, they were already 3 steps ahead of the people they were hunting. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. And there would be days when the cost felt too high and the victories too small to matter. But they'd do it anyway, because someone had to. Because the alternative was letting the people who caused suffering operate without consequence. Because buried in the wreckage of every attack, every plot, every network they dismantled, there were lives saved and futures preserved. And that was worth fighting for. 3 months later, Marcus stood in Arlington National Cemetery, finally keeping a promise he'd made 3 years ago. Rawlins's grave was simple. White marble headstone, military honors, a small American flag planted in the ground beside it. Marcus knelt, placing a hand on the stone. "We found her," he said quietly. "She's alive, and she's okay, and she's doing good work. I thought you'd want to know." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and Marcus let himself believe it was an answer. He stood, saluted once, then walked back to where Amira was waiting by the car. "You good?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm good." They drove back into the city, back to the work that never ended, back to the fight that would probably consume the rest of their lives. But they drove together, 2 people who'd survived the worst and come out stronger, 2 people who'd proven that even broken systems could produce something worth saving if the right people refused to give up. And in the end, that was enough. Not perfection, not redemption without scars, just enough. Enough to keep going, enough to keep fighting, enough to look at themselves in the mirror and know they'd chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. That was the real victory. Not medals or commendations or recognition from people who'd never understand what it cost. but the quiet knowledge that when the moment came to stand or run, to fold or fight, to protect the system that had failed them or tear it down in revenge, they'd chosen to stand. They'd chosen to fight. And they'd won. The end.